100% more restart. Oh, you're killing me here, Twitch. You're killing me. There we go. Now I have video, and everybody else should too, I hope. Okay, so QuickFort will allow us to export blueprints. If you make a complete bedroom set, for example, in QuickFort, it will basically allow you to take that blueprint, put it directly in the world as a designation, and have your dwarves dig it out without having to manually designate the same pattern over and over again. If you pop out there on the wiki or out there in QuickFort's documentation, or if you scroll down through the discussion of QuickFort, you're going to find a huge number of blueprints, ranging from the fanciful to the incredibly pragmatic. We won't primarily be using them today, but it's worth a good look through them if you're curious about, more advanced things, or if you're perhaps the kind of person who wants to be able to sit down and design your fort way before you ever sit down in front of the game. You could spend hours in front of QuickFort templates just designing a fort before you ever sat down to play. Some of these others, I confess, I haven't used. Announcement window, I'm guessing, is a customizable ability to hold your announcements off to the side. Primarily, I'll be using SoundSense to duplicate that effect, allowing me to passively observe the announcements via audio cues rather than having to watch the announcement window itself. And in the event that I feel like I need it, we'll pop it up briefly along the way. DF Storymaker, Dwarven Realms, Dwarf Mockup, Dwarf Portrait, and Picture Fort, as well as SoundSense GTK, I haven't used. I don't know, frankly, anything about them, and I can't honestly discuss them in any intelligent fashion whatsoever. My apologies to the developers and designers of those applications. Sorry, guys. I just play too many games in a year, and I can't keep track of every single third-party app for Dwarf Fortress anymore. Once you get to the point where you're comfortable with all of these things, at that point, you should be able to go back and investigate those on your own time, and at that point, you'll understand the game well enough to know what you're getting into. And that's pretty much it in terms of what we're going to tweak. If you, at this point, I'm going to run out here and slap the play button, basically. But you can mess around with all sorts of things in here. This is actually the game is not only heavily modifiable, but the interface here via the starter kit is actually fairly full-featured once you start digging into the init files and such yourself. Once you've got everything configured to your liking, hit play. It will warn you if any of your utilities are already started. In this case, SoundSense is already started. There's our game starting up now, so we'll let the intro play for tradition's sake. All right, now we're going to disable the Dwarf Fortress default soundtrack because we're going to be using SoundSense fairly heavily, so we'll hit escape and go into music and sound, and I'll turn that all the way down. It's a wonderful guitar track, but I've heard it a little bit along the way, and we won't be listening to it on a regular basis. That's not SoundSense, guys. That's the default Dwarf Fortress audio, which we disable. SoundSense actually doesn't start up until the game log kicks in, so SoundSense hasn't even really started up at this point. You can see it. I mean, it's running, but it's monitoring an audio that isn't playing. All right, so this console window is DF hack. We'll enter some commands manually. This works like a standard command line interface. You type in a command, you get stuff. Basic question mark will give you, help. And if you have a command in particular, like say prospect, you can do help prospect, and it will tell you, oops, if you can type correctly, which I can't, it will tell you about prospect and how it works. Now, fair warning, guys, if you go digging around in all these tools and you're a really new player, Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers all over the place. Uh, don't go digging if you're not sure what you're digging into. But we'll touch on a few fairly non-spoilery tools, and then leave most of the rest for you to discover on your own. We'll primarily be using the Dwarf Fortress interface itself, except for labors and jobs where we'll use Dwarf Therapist, and for a few little tweaky sorts of things that we'll touch DF Hack for. Now, when I create a new world, there's a few ways you can do it. You can use the default world creator, which allows you some very generalized settings in terms of how the world gets created, biomes and so forth. This is a fairly minimalist thing, and if you're wanting to start up from scratch, it's not bad to necessarily create a world this way. But after you've done it a few times, you might be more curious about what goes on under the hood in terms of world generation. And you can find the answers to that in the Design New World with Advanced Parameters section, which is what we'll be using tonight. I'll actually export my world gen settings so that you all can generate the same world at home if you're playing along on the same version of Dwarf Fortress, which, for the record, is 4303 in the starter pack that Paradex's Errant has. Don't worry, we'll dig deep and we'll dig greedily, but I'm going to configure the world the way the way a new player will get the most out of it before they start running into real problems. Once you've got some experience under your belt with the game and you're more familiar with how the game plays, you may want to tweak these settings to make your game harder or easier, to guarantee certain types of biomes or Embark sites are more common, allowing you a better variety or selection from which to choose. The advanced parameters allow you an incredible amount of control over world generation. One of the tools in the starter kit, Perfect World, back over here if you pop up the utilities, Perfect World actually allows you to create your own world terrains. So if you wanted to import the United States or play on a realistic recreation of Westeros in Dwarf Fortress, those are theoretically things you could do. Perfect World allows you to kind of paint your terrain and therefore get the kind of thing you want. We won't mess with that tonight. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. This is the one I was using last night for my trial for it, and we'll just delete that because I'm going to recreate it from scratch. You'll generally want to pick whichever settings you're going to mess with and then copy them. I don't recommend editing the default settings if you're going to edit them. It's fine to create a world using one of these seeds, but I don't necessarily think that you should modify the defaults. If you're going to make any changes, I highly, highly suggest you just hit C, which creates a complete clone of the exact thing that you just wanted to tweak, and then tweak it from there. In this case, we'll change the title. We'll call this Extra Life 2016, because that's what we're doing tonight, right, guys? We're donating for the kids? Right. Okay, so once we've done that, we'll be able to edit the settings for that. In this case, we're going to create a seed, and we're going to create seeds for each one of these. This will tell Dwarf Fortress to use the random pre-gen seed that we create. We're going to do the same seed for all of these. If you came back later after this was done and changed some of these seeds, you might get a world similar to mine, or you might get a world that was vastly different. And the way you would be able to determine that would be by changing these seeds. If, for example, I change the creature seed, I'm going to get slightly different creatures out in my world, although the terrain might very well be the same. Now that's going to have impacts on history and so forth. The naming seed, if I love my world but I just don't like the way things are named, I could change the naming seed, and that would allow me to change the names of all my creatures in the next time I created that world without changing the terrain or the creatures and so forth. History seed will determine, kind of how history flows a little bit in the pre-world gen history. And the seed itself actually controls things like terrain and so forth, biomes and such, and that's an important one. We're going to set all our seeds the same way. Keep in mind, each of these seeds is used for its own purposes and separately, so you could have different seeds for each of them. You could have random seeds for some of them or none of them. However you choose to do it. Embark points control how much stuff you can bring at start. If you're a really fresh new player to the point that you absolutely don't understand the game systems, and you want to experiment with them in a more or less consequence-free environment, turn the embark points up from their default to some huge number, and you can embark with basically anything you want. If you want to start with, 50 draft animals that you can start a cattle ranch on day one. Turn the embark points up, and you can experiment with cattle ranches, for example. If you want to mess around with weapon forging, and so that's really all you're concerned about, and you don't care so much about building a functional fort so much as you do experimenting with systems, changing your embark points is a fantastic way to allow you to take the stuff you might want with you on that initial embark day, and thereby start experimenting rather than having to go through the same fort setup process from start to finish each and every time. For a default game, I wouldn't touch it. I'd leave it right where it is. I wouldn't mess with it. But if you're just wanting to play around, that's a handy setting to be able to tweak. End year determines how long your history will run before the game stops, cuts it off, and gets you ready to play. Now, that's assuming nothing else stops the world generation process early, whether that be you or some other condition. So in this case, if we let world gen run from start to finish and nothing else stopped us early, we'd run all the way to 1050, and that's the default. We're going to leave it. All of this stuff is default for this setting, and most of these things we won't touch. Population cap, site cap, percentage beasts, year to begin. I don't want my unimportant. These are your historical nobodies, basically, and the game is asking whether you just want to delete them from the file. If you're really short on space, this can save you a little bit of space, I guess, maybe, but your world gen will be filled with all sorts of somebodies rather than actual named people. So you're going to see lots of historical events where, great hero number 46 killed somebody because it just called out that person who never did anything important in their life. Reveal all historical events is useful if you want to be able to have all of those things visible to your dwarves for recording purposes. If I set this to no, basically not everything would be known to everyone to start, and things would sort of filter out. I turn up, so this next category, I guess, deserves a little more, this next category deserves a little more careful consideration, I guess. Had caps lock on. I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. So this next set, elevation, rainfall, temperature, drainage, and volcanism and savagery. Control your world's actual terrain and layout in a very general sense. Generally speaking, you don't want to tweak these too much. We're going to pop out here to the wiki. For world's actual terrain and layout in a Woo! Love that loop. Out here on the wiki, you'll find all kinds of interesting information. I highly recommend new players tour the wiki at some point. But in particular, I want to draw your attention to the biome article, which has this distribution picture here. And from 0 to 100, this is everything in your world, every terrain type that can come to exist. And when you modify various settings, in this case rainfall and drainage, you will determine what type of biomes you get. If I limited my maximum rainfall to 9, for example, 9 being right here on this chart, nothing to the right of this line would ever be created. We'd have no swamps, no marshes, no savannas, no grasslands. We'd have plenty of desert, rocky wasteland, and badlands, though, because those are the only terrain types we could create. Now, that's actually a bad thing, because you probably are going to want wood at some point, and these guys aren't real high on the wood category. Likewise, if you wanted a fairly dry terrain, swamps aren't dry terrain. If you want something without lots of trees, broadleaf forests aren't going to get it done for you. What I recommend generally is not touching the minimums and maximums here so much. You're going to want to probably leave these primarily alone. Elevation I turn up a little bit. I believe anything less than 100 is ocean. So this makes my oceans a little more shallow, basically, and since ocean isn't playable terrain anyway, minimizing the amount of space underwater actually works well for us. I don't want to get rid of it completely because I may want to play on a coastline, but turning it down a little bit means that there's going to be more land available to us, at least, generally speaking. Minimum rainfall, just from a realism standpoint, I turn up to 1. There is no place on this or any other world that has rainfall that's not going to see any rainfall ever, ever, ever. It just might be a very rare event. That does make deserts and wastelands slightly less common. Maybe 10% of them will disappear, but that's not really a big deal. If you're really concerned about that, you can turn it back down to 0, knock yourself out. Drainage I'll leave alone. There are places with impermeable rock. Volcanic glass, for example, doesn't drain real well. Volcanism, I strongly advise that you don't touch. Minimum and maximum here have important ramifications for terrain in very, very subtle ways that you might not be expecting as a new player. In particular, low volcanism is essential for flux stone, like non-marble flux stone, I guess I should say, like calcite and other calcium carbonate-laden ores that you may need to make steel. And so if you plan to make steel on any site that isn't loaded with marble, you're going to need to make sure your volcanism is down low, your minimum volcanism is low enough to allow it. Likewise, volcanoes only appear at very high volcanism, and so if you cap your maximum volcanism too low, there are no volcanoes in your world no matter what. Now those can be the source of all kinds of rejections, so generally speaking, I don't touch them. Savagery, this deserves a slight mention here. Generally, the world could be divided up into 3 bands, low, medium, and high, and they roughly correspond to 0 to 32, 33 to 66, and then 67 up. Dwarves require a non-high savagery area, so if you set your world to not allow low and mid savagery, you're not going to have a playable world because dwarves can't start civilizations in those worlds. I turned mine up a little bit. I'm not so worried about finding a low savagery area. Oops. Assuming I do it properly here. 10. I don't get rid of the low savagery end completely, but I do minimize it a little bit. If I'm really hunting for a low savagery area, I might not turn that up, but we're not going to be looking for a low savagery area. We're going to be looking for something at least moderate, if not high savagery. I don't care so much about the evil, but I do care about finding something with some interesting stuff going on. Mesh sizes, we're going to tinker with these in a fairly standard fashion. I use a small mesh so that we get lots and lots of variation. And then I turn up the middle, the high, and the low. And so this is the low elevation terrain, mid elevation terrain, and high elevation terrain. And so my world will tend to look like plateaus, generally speaking. We'll have plenty of stuff at the high end, 10 times as much as we would in this range. So there will be low terrain, and then a small band of terrain that jumps up a little bit, and then terrain at another level, and then terrain that will jump up a bit, and then more terrain at the high end. Now, there is some variation in those. You won't really notice them in those big bands because each of these bands has its own sub-variation. So the 80 to 100 band isn't all 100. It's 80 to 100, and so there'll be some subtle variation. But the space between the 60s and the 80s will be fairly minimal, and the space between the 20s and the 40s will be fairly minimal. What this means is you'll tend to get areas that are fairly pure in terms of elevation. There'll be some crossover, but not a whole lot. And I do this same process for each of these because what I'm really concerned primarily about is that there is some of each of those high end, and that we don't, in this case, get these really weird breaks. You'll get some transition zone between them, but not much. So the world will tend to cross over quickly and then go back to what it was, or go back to what the new values are on the other side of the boundary line, if you will. Now we're going to go back and revisit these because I need to make sure that the biome settings haven't changed since the last time I played. If the wiki's been updated with new ones, then some of these may be out of date. So humor me for just a moment while I pop back over there to make sure that the distribution hasn't changed too much. So here's what we're going to be tweaking, in effect. We'll have 0 to 20, so we'll have plenty of sand and grassland and rocky wasteland in there. But the 20 to 40 range, savannas primarily, will be fairly minimal. There will be some, but we'll eliminate most of the savannas. If you care about finding open grasslands with elephants and lions, this setting will not work for you because we're going to eliminate a lot of the savanna terrain that those would occupy. Likewise, once we get in here, the marsh and shrubland area has a big chunk here. So then there's the 40 to 60 range, which is most of the marsh shrubland areas will still be intact, but we trimmed them back a little bit. So the high end here and the low end here are getting trimmed off a little bit. Likewise, between 60 and 80 is gone, so we lose all of our conifer forests. Kind of a loss, but we'll deal. Maybe I'll turn up that setting a little bit so we'll have some more pine trees. There'll be some, but not very many. This world will tend towards broadleaves and swamps and shrublands and then dry. So we'll have dry, hilly, and or marshy, and then heavily forested. So those 3 bands will tend to be most common. Notice that I didn't set savannas to 0. I didn't set conifer forest to 0. That means there'll be some, but they'll be fairly uncommon. Now, likewise, drainage will work the same way. So again, we'll have the 0 to 20 range, but we're trimming off some of our desert, we're trimming out some of our grasslands, savannas, marshes, and swamps. And down here in the drainage category, we're doing the same thing. So the 20 to 40 range is trimmed, right? 20 to 40 is trimmed up a bit. So we lose some of our rocky wasteland, we lose some of our shrubland, we lose more of our conifer forest and broadleaf forest. We tend to trim those out a little bit. Likewise, down here, we lose some of our badlands and rocky wastelands. These are areas that they exist, and I want to have them, but I don't necessarily care about starting a fort in them most of the time, and so minimizing them for me works. Now, what you want in your game, what type of terrain you want to embark in your fort, you'll need to give those some consideration if you plan on messing with these settings. Otherwise, I'd just leave them at the default distributions, set your meshes up, and leave them all as 1. I wouldn't mess with the amounts you get. And you'll get a fairly average distribution across the board. We're going to end up with some of that anyway, because some of the other settings we'll tweak later on will kind of override these a little bit. I want poles at both ends just because why not? Oops. North and south. There. Ah! There we go. Minimum mountain peaks I don't care about. These are really just terrain features in terms of landmarks. They're not necessarily valuable in any other sense. Oceans are not developable terrain, so I don't really care if we have any. Minimum volcano number I like to turn up because finding volcanoes is one of those useful things for a new player. We may not start on a volcano this time. I don't know yet. We'll see. But turning them up a little bit allows them to be more common and easier to find in terrain that I might be interested in. A volcano in Badlands doesn't do me any good if I want to embark in a swamp. A volcano in a swamp doesn't do me any good if I want to embark in shrublands, for example. So having a few of these to scatter about is good. Having too many can make your world reject because it's simply not possible to place that many. So don't get too crazy with these numbers. Mineral scarcity is one of those things that you can tweak to make your game a little more palatable. I find the default settings a little sparse in terms of metals. I'm used to the earlier versions where iron was basically in every site, and you could basically start up an iron forge anywhere you wanted, at any time you wanted. This setting won't give us that, but it will make finding metals fairly straightforward. Pretty much any site is going to have metals. Most of them will have several. That'll make finding iron a little easier on us, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that we can find iron. At the same time, it's not such a low setting that we would start to phase out other minerals we might care about, like coal, for example. I don't want to get this too low because while I want metals, I don't want to have to deal with wood furnaces and burning charcoal to process my materials. Now, most of these other settings, Mega Beasts, Titans, bad things in the world, I don't touch. Leave alone. If you're wanting to get rid of them completely, you can, but they won't really generally impact you unless you're either an adventurer or embarking in evil terrain, and we're not going to do either of those today, so leaving them at the defaults isn't going to hurt us. Divine materials is a fairly new thing. This is not just normal steel, but some special sort of godly created steel that doesn't exist in the mortal realm. You could theoretically find objects or items made from this somewhere in the world. You'll find references to them elsewhere in the when you go to make items, for example, you may see references to them there, even though you can't make things from them. You may see them referenced in the written works of your dwarves or in the historical works of your world. I wouldn't turn them off unless you're experiencing some sort of problem with them, and I can't even imagine what that would be. If you want to guarantee that you can embark in good or evil terrain, you may want to tweak these next settings to your liking. Keep in mind that turning them up too far can make it impossible to embark if there's no neutral terrain no neutral mountain terrain in the world, neutral and moderate or low savagery terrain, I guess I should say. Then you don't have dwarves. And if you don't have dwarves, by default, you don't have a playable civilization. That doesn't stop you from playing as an adventurer, But if you're planning to play in Fortress mode, tweaking these too far to the extremes, just like all the other settings, can cause worlds that reject. So here, let's for a moment, let's make sure we can do that. Let's say we wanted, let's create something that we know won't work. Maximum number of subregions is 1, but we're going to set up, let's see. Minimum final desert region count is 20. Minimum final forest region count is 20, and I think that'll probably get us a nice reject. So let me save these real fast and we'll tweak it just to see if that works. So right off, it rejected a few, and then as it was starting to go along, it was rejecting. If you look at the terrain here, you'll notice that it's almost exclusively forest. There's no deserts here, and I have all sorts of other settings that require that certain terrains be present, and so these worlds will keep rejecting pretty much without end. Before I go much further, let's pop out here to your root directory of Dwarf Fortress. And the reason is because I have a map rejection log. Remember I turned on log map rejects? We created tried to create 12 worlds and failed map creation on 12 worlds before I stopped it. And this is the reason why we failed. And so it's telling you, hey, you didn't have enough forest squares. Hey, you didn't have enough low altitudes. Hey, your savagery wasn't distributed properly or whatever. Too many subregions, not enough peaks, etc., etc. Each of these settings you are playing with allows you to understand why your worlds aren't being created. If you've created something that's too extreme, this will tell you what that is and why. So we're going to go back to our settings over here for a moment. Oops, not this one. And I'm going to abort here because I don't really actually care about that test world we were throwing together real quick. We'll drop back down to where we were, the region numbers. And that's kind of what I'm getting at when I say be careful about setting these to things that are too extreme. If you set things that are contradictory, for example, the game will happily try to create worlds that are contradictory forever and fail forever. Turn on your map rejects if you're going to be messing around in World Gen. You're going to want to know why things fail when they fail. Generally speaking, we won't touch these too much. I do want to see all of these terrains. I don't just necessarily want them to be the large terrains, which is why I trim them the way I do. So we'll get everything. We just won't get as much of it as we might otherwise see. That kind of expands the number of terrains that I, as a new player, I would recommend you embark on. It's easier to build a fortress where there's an abundant supply of wood, plenty of flux stone, sand and clay, iron on site, and if you tweak World Gen properly, you can make those kinds of sites a little more available. Theoretically, it's possible to have everything on site, which would make for a fairly straightforward and easy game, and if you're looking for one, you could do it. But I wouldn't spend your world looking for it forever. All my caverns have at least some openness. All my caverns have at least some water. I don't have any dry caves. That's mostly to avoid an annoyance. It's not really essential, but if you like farming in the caves at some point, or if you like being able to see the cave environment, properly propagated with moss and fungus trees, setting this to 1 guarantees that you won't run into the issue of having 3 dry caverns on your site and therefore no underground fungus whatsoever. If you want to experience Dwarf Fortress in all its raw brutality, leave that at 0, and it is possible that you will run into it eventually, a site with no water in any of your caves whatsoever, no mud, and no underground farming in that site by default. Do leave the magma layer on, do leave the bottom layer on. Z-levels, these Z-level settings need a brief discussion here. For new players, these are things I would tweak to make your game a little more straightforward. Imagine, if you will, the world as a stack of pancakes. We as humans are standing atop the topmost pancake. Z-levels are those pancakes, and your world is comprised of a number of Z-levels from the top to the bottom. Okay? Depending on what you're wanting to do in your site, various things here are worth tweaking. For example, let's say you wanted to build a 30-story tower. Well, Z-levels above ground here limits the height of your tower. If you set it to 15, for example, there are only 15 sky levels above the ground, and at that point, your maximum height is that limit. You can't go above that. That's basically outside the world boundary. It's outside the atmosphere. Yeah, and between each layer, pancake is a layer of syrup that can be removed or exploited to our benefit. Um, so if you're planning to build a really tall tower, you may want to tweak this a bit. So let's go up a little. I don't recommend you go too large on this. You can get a large number of birds, for example, hovering at the super high levels of the map, and that does tend to slow things down. So as you expand your world vertically, keep in mind you're expanding the amount of stuff in your world that has to be kept track of. You're increasing the memory usage of your game. You're increasing the amount of processor overhead that's necessary to handle pathfinding. Um, it's essential and incumbent upon you, the player, not to get too crazy with this. For new players, I like to put about 15 levels above the first cave. This gives you an ample space between ground level and the first subterranean obstructions in which to build a fort. It's 15 levels is plenty to build a huge fort, an enormous, gigantic fort, without sprawling out. Well, don't worry, Techman. We'll get to floors. Believe me, all the gory details of construction along the way. We're going to get to all of that tomorrow. Rest assured. Now, I like to have a little more space between my caves so that my caves aren't like giant empty spaces separated by paper-thin walls, top to bottom, which seems a little unrealistic to me. So I like to spread my caves out a little bit, put 5 spaces between each, and I like to put a little more space at the bottom of the world in case I want to develop, in case later on I want to have my dwarves undergo a mass exodus and build a second fort way down by the magma sea at the base of the world. I can do that. Don't touch sea levels above layer 5. You don't need to expand or contract it. It doesn't help you. Don't touch the Z levels at the bottom. You don't need to expand or contract it. It doesn't help you unless you're planning to build very specific things, which I won't go into now. New players shouldn't even be concerned about it. Minimum and maximum natural cave size. This is like the open space in your caves, if it still works the same way. With the changes to caves, I'm not entirely sure this is actually working the way it originally did. Generally, I don't mess with it. If you set these too small, you're probably not going to see fungus trees. And I do want to actually see mushroom trees, so we're going to leave it alone. Number of mountain caves and non-mountain caves is primarily of importance to adventurers, but it does restrict the fortress sites. And if you have lots and lots of these, then you're going to cut down on the number of sites a little, I guess. Not enough that you'd care. Make caves visible is useful to knowing where and when you can't embark or shouldn't embark because your next door neighbor is a manticore. Allowing embark options to show tunnels allows you to see underground linkages between places. I don't know that I've honestly seen those in the recent version, and frankly, you're probably not going to be embarking near anything that would have tunnels anyway, but I like to leave it on just for my benefit. Number of civilizations limits, like you might imagine, the number of civilizations and playable civilization required restricts whether you can create a world for adventure mode only or not. If I say that a playable civilization is required, this prevents me from creating legends-only worlds, for example, where I can look at the history, but there's nothing playable. Theoretically, if I wanted to create a world solely for purposes of, deriving dwarven stories, for example, I could create a legends-only world without any concern that that game was actually playable, and then go back through the legends of history to create my story on that framework, for example. Since we're planning to play in Fortress mode, we do require a playable civilization, so I'm going to leave that alone. This is the distribution of squares in your world. Now, remember earlier where we tweaked our settings to have, kind of an even distribution of high, mid, and low? This limits that. And so we'll kick subworlds out, which are perfectly fine, except they didn't have the proper distribution of low, middle, and high terrain. So while I've set the frequency of those things up above to be 10 to 1 on most things, so it's 10 low, 1 mid, 1 translation, or 1 transition, and then 10, 1, 10, what we show here is that after that, we then want to apply a filter over those worlds such that worlds that don't have at least this minimum number of tiles, squares, if you will, world gen tiles, at each of these distributions will be kicked out. So we want to see roughly twice as many mid-elevation squares as we do low and high. And so we may kick a few worlds out that were distributed too evenly. Okay, Nessus, you need to hit refresh, because if you can't see anything, it's working at my end. So this prevents us from having a world that's, too perfectly evenly distributed. It will give us a mid-elevation. It will tend to favor mid-savagery and mid-volcanism, with some extremes at the other ends. So while I'm making the low and the mid and the high more frequent, they'll still have to adhere to certain ratios at a minimum before the world will be acceptable. And that's World Gen in a nutshell. I'm I'm of course glossing over. And Nessus, keep an eye on your stream, because if you start to notice that it's not actually progressing, you don't hear video or audio, I can't necessarily guarantee it's at my end, but generally it's not. Lots more clients will get dropped than the actual stream. That said, we did it earlier, and I had to bounce the stream to try and fix it. Let me know if you guys notice that all of a sudden it's en masse, you can't see it, but try a refresh first. Now that we've touched all of our seeds, I'm going to hit escape here, and I'm going to hit F6 to save our parameters. Now what that's doing behind the scenes out here in your Dwarf Fortress folder is creating the World Gen seeds for your world. And so all of those, not just the one we've created, but all of those are available out here in init World Gen, this file right here, init World Gen. And so if we crack that open, and I'm going to open it with Notepad++ because I love Notepad++, we're going to go here to the end. And down here at the very bottom, you're going to see the settings that we tweaked displayed as tags. So here's the title of my world and all of the seeds of that world, dimensions, embark points, and so on and so forth. All the settings we created, everything we did, all of it is here. Okay? Displayed as tags. Now I'm going to export this file in my save games at the end of this tonight's stream to a package so that you all can download it and follow along tomorrow with your own copy of the world if you would so like. But if you want to be able to replicate my world that you see here on stream from scratch, guaranteed every time, you can take this collection of tags, everything from where it says World Gen here right above it, all of the tags for my world, every single one, you can come down through here, copy all of this out, and paste it into your World Gen file, and you will have a copy of my World Gen seeds. So what I'll probably do is throw these out on paste bin, so that's just this World Gen setting. And then when I zip up the save files, I'll also zip up the World Gen text and my entire file, so I can export everything all together as well. So those of you who want to generate this world ahead of time can just go out to paste bin, copy and paste, done. And those of you who want to come back later on will have a nice archival copy when we're done. Yay! Okay, now in addition to that, in addition to World Gen, you'll also find init, dinit. Remember, we talked about init, and dinit is similar. There's also a change I always make out here in the announcements file, and this is an annoyance feature. If you're a new player and you're not comfortable with tweaking your announcements, I don't necessarily think you have to do this, but this is basically a list of all the announcements in the game. Fair warning, there are some spoilers in here. If you're not sure what you're looking at, I don't suggest you go ahead and read everything in through here. It doesn't tell you necessarily what they are, but it's 50-50 on whether you figure out what's spoilers and what's not. So don't necessarily come strolling through here to look for things if you're not comfortable. In particular, we're going to look for damp stone and warm stone. So when your dwarves dig tiles that are one tile removed from lava or water, they will discover damp or warm stone. Now, by default, the game will pause and recenter your camera to that event. So you will discover the stone, the game will shift your camera to wherever that stone was discovered, and it will pause the action so that you get a good look at exactly what was discovered. Now, initially that sounds pretty good, and on your first tile, it's a wonderful thing, but then you're going to try to dig under a river, or you're going to try to dig under a pond, or you're going to have some indoor plumbing that flows between your levels, and you're going to have to dig around it. And when you do, you're going to pause and recenter, and then you're going to unpause and move your camera back where you wanted it, and then you're going to pause and recenter because there's another tile that was discovered, and then you're going to unpause and put it back where you wanted it, and then it's going to discover a new tile, and it's going to pause and recenter, and it will do that at every tile for the entire time that digging project is going on, which I find really cumbersome personally. So these tags can be modified thus. The P stands for pause, and the R stands for recenter. And normally this tag would look something like this. So what I do is I remove the recenter and the pause from those tags and save that file, and I no longer pause and recenter on all of those, which is fantastic if you're going to be doing any sort of digging around lava or water. Keep in mind, this is perfectly safe. It's not going to end your fort. And by that I mean your dwarves will automatically cancel a job if you designated it while it was hidden and it turns out to be warm or damp stone. They will cancel that designation. They won't just dig into the side of the volcano automatically. What it won't do is constantly pause and recenter your game, which, like I said, whoo, buddy, once it starts happening, you'll hate it. Now, I'm not going to save any changes here because I made that change the other night, and I'm not going to save any changes here because I didn't actually change anything. I was just cracking it open to show you. Each of these controls all sorts of things. Interfaces your key bindings, overrides is various sorts of graphics overrides. Like I said, unless you know what you're doing, don't tweak. And if you know what you're doing, you know more than I do, because most of those are things I don't touch. Announcements we tweaked. We've looked at init and dinit. We've discussed world gen settings. That leaves Embark profiles. So, back over to Dwarf Fortress. Let's create our world. And you'll notice it kicks out a few worlds here. Let's see if we're going to get one or if I'm going to have to play with our settings a little bit. We may have gone too high on our distribution. 10 to 1 may be a bit much. Oh, nope. Let's see. Okay, so that's enough for me to say, okay, let's stop and take a look and see what's going on. Why are we failing here? What's up with our world gen settings? What did we do wrong? So, we'll go back out to our root Dwarf Fortress folder. We'll jump down to the world, or the map rejection log here. There we go. Run down to the bottom, because these things are starting at the top. Not enough low, not enough high altitudes. Flat, rough, not evenly distributed. Some minor failures on counts that I'm not too worried about. Okay, so we could get around that in a few ways. The easiest way is to go back into our settings. Oops. Our settings. We'll abort this. We will edit our advanced parameters again. Jump down here to the very bottom where it has all these minimums. And if you set all these to 0, the filters basically are turned off, and it won't reject for savagery, it won't reject for volcanism. None of these things will reject. So this will get rid of all of our elevation rejections completely, as well as our rain rejections, savagery rejections, and so forth, completely gone. We'll go back up here, and we'll tweak the 10 to 1 down just a little. We'll make it 5 to 1 instead. That's a little more... that's not quite as extreme, so that should probably get us a little more tolerance on our rejections as well. Since I'm not too worried about finding an example of the terrain I care to embark on, I don't necessarily need the minimums in place to do the rejections. And tweaking these to not be quite so extreme will mean that we get a little more, hopefully a little more common distribution. Still not looking good. Hilarious. Got one last night in 700 rejects plus already. Awesome. Escape. We'll abort this again. Take a look and see what's going on this time. There's that. Open it. So we get a nice fresh copy. Jump to the bottom. And we're failing the initial region counts, sometimes by a lot. And I don't want to get rid of the initial mountain counts, so I'm not going to touch those. Let's see. So that means we've trimmed down just a little too far in our mid-range stuff. So let's back up again a little further. This time, let's go down here and take a look and see. We've got these minimum initial region counts and so forth. And I don't really care that there's wetlands to start, and I don't really care if there's deserts to finish. I don't care if there's any forests. We'll end up with some. I don't care if there's any open. I do care if there's at least 2 mountain regions, because that prevents us hopefully from getting. It makes it less likely that we will get. I don't care about oceans at all. We'll cut these down because I don't really care that we get too much grassland. So we'll minimize these out a little bit. And I don't care about hills because I'm not planning on embarking any of those. We'll trim those down. Sound sense isn't too loud, right, guys? Oh, that's what it was. I did drop back subregions, didn't I? Did I turn it back up? Well, let's escape and abort that then. Let's go back out. Yes, I want to leave without saving my changes. We'll come back in. And that will reload the world gen text file, and that will have all my changes aborted. So, did I set maximum number of subregions and forget to change it back? Shame on me. I did want to demonstrate that. Did I forget to change it back? I did! Ah, that's hilarious! Don't set that low. That's bad. Oops. I like nicely varied terrain, so we're going to get as many subregions as it wants to create. That's fine. Let's escape. Save that. I'll bet we get a whole lot more luck now. At least I'm hoping we should. Oh yeah, minerals. Here we go. Everybody, props to Lack and Fear for remembering that I dropped max subregions. That was our sticky wicket. Worlds that would conform to the max subregion would fail about 14,000 other checks. Alright, looks like we got a great big ocean in the middle, some desert east and west. You can see the dwarves sprouting up here in the mountains over on this side of the map. There's some volcanoes in these mountains here. Some sand deserts in the north and the far northeast. I'm guessing this is Badlands. Big mountain range here, so dwarves on the west and southwest as well. There's some evil terrain here, so this dwarven settlement here is probably going to get annihilated, and whichever dwarven civilization it is probably going to end up being owned by the goblins. You can kind of see the elves spreading out here. That some of this yellow is elven civilizations. Humans are those settlements along the rivers here. Here, for example. There's probably some goblins in this area here. Let's see, some glacier up north here. Tundra. Volcano islands in the middle of this chunk of water here. Some swamps and forests all over the place. Looks like we're going to get a fairly varied world, which is nice. I'm going to let the history run for a bit, so we have some built-up history in the world, some civilization exchanges back and forth, conquerings, battles, enemies, wars, that kind of thing, so that the history that we've got going on behind our fort is a little richer. If you want your world to be primarily about your fort and the things that occurred in the very early prehistory, set your end year to 1. And basically the game will start up, do prehistory, and then immediately the world will begin. Lots of your dwarves will basically say that they were born in a time before time, but that's okay as long as you're comfortable with that weirdness. And basically every event that happens in your fortress at that point will be historic because, frankly, the world hasn't existed that long. And everything that happens in your fort is pretty much everything that's happened in the world. So I'm going to let this run to probably about 250 years or so. Keep in mind, the longer it runs, the slower it runs. So year 1050 is a whole lot slower than year 500, and the further out that goes, the more that becomes the case. As it progresses, you will see various ages above your year readout there. The age of myth, the age of legend, the age of heroes, the age of the cyclops, whatever. Those actually do mean various things about the state of the world that you are looking at. For example, the Age of Myth is basically a prehistoric area where things are pretty much in shuffle and transition all over the place. Okay, and these can have all sorts of different forms. Bear with me here a second, guys. Okay, right now, for example, we're in the Age of Myths, which means we meet this particular set of criteria. We still have lots and lots of gods and devils walking the world. We still have lots and lots of mega beasts floating around and so forth. As those get wiped out by fighting civilizations and amongst each other, we'll eventually move into the Age of Legends, and then after that, we'll move into the Age of Heroes. Now, Depending on the distribution, you can find some rare ages, like the Age of 3 Powers here and the Age of 2 Races. This is basically a particular set of conditions that it can exist. Ages, Golden Age, for example. Eventually, you get the world that goes on long enough will eventually crumble and end up in the Age of Death. You will have passed through the end of all the civilizations, and all of these things will basically cease to be. If you get to that point and you never did none of these other things ended, then you'll end up with the Ages of Emptiness, basically. And like it says, world that ends in those, you can only start in Legends or Adventurer mode. There is no playable Fortress mode. Mess around with them. If you're looking for a particular age, guaranteeing those is very difficult. You basically would have to generate world upon world upon world and look for what you wanted with the settings you've provided until you found the age you were looking for. And there would be no guarantee that the prehistory of the world would necessarily produce the necessary set of circumstances to cause some of those really rare ones. So you kind of have to cross your fingers if you're really hunting for a particular one. But it's not necessarily impactful. It simply indicates the state of your world in any given state of world gen. So right now we know, for example, that there are at least 2/3 of the mythical creatures and gods and devils that were walking the earth at the beginning are still out there floating around in the world 200 years after its creation, basically. Below that, you'll see a list of historical figures, the number of historical dead, that's people in wars and eaten by historical beasts and so forth. Events includes everything, that's births, marriages, deaths, wars, peace treaties, new founded civilizations, new founded sites, you name it, it's in the events list. If you open your world up in Legends, or if after World Gen we export Legends like we're going to, you can actually take a look at those things and see the history of your world unfold, detailed out for you. Dwarf Fortress is hugely into an incredibly detailed and procedural history. And so if you're the kind of person who is either fascinated by procedural generation or who really wants to dig into the randomly generated procedural history of your world, then I strongly recommend exporting a copy of the Legends from your world and combing through them with the Legends viewer. We're going to do that here in a bit once we've actually created our world. But I need to let the history run for a bit so we've got something to kind of comb through. And because I kind of want my fort to be a part of history and not all of history in this case. So how long you guys want me to run history for? I mean, it's really kind of up to you, to the viewers. Since I didn't do this beforehand, it's kind of a slow process. I know you all have got to at some point want to actually see, the game. So I don't want to necessarily run Legends all night for you. At the same time, a longer world history is not necessarily a bad thing to have. So, in the interests of a democratic stream, to the best of my ability, as your benevolent dictator, I'm going to open this up to you guys, the viewers who are online and paying attention right now. And I'll let World Gen run from now to up to the 1050 limit that we already have in place. As long as you want. Let's see a show of numbers, guys. How long you want it to run? How long can you stand to watch it? Because unfortunately, while the World Gen is incredibly detailed behind the scenes, the actual process of watching it complete is paint drying, I'm afraid. 22 minutes. I don't know when we started, so let's say so for right now is 5:33. 22 minutes is probably enough to finish, but maybe. I see 250. Do I hear 500? No, I'm kidding, guys. Come on, let's hear it. You guys are watching. You showed up. Let's go. I can't run it backwards, unfortunately. So you've got to go higher than the current turn count. You better get it out there quick, because after a point, it's going to pass yours. Chop chop, guys. Early cat catches the dwarf, right? I'll tell you what. Lackenfear donated. Lackenfear donated, and he's already going to get one of the dwarves named after him. But since nobody else has actually gone out there and donated yet, I think I'm going to take his vote. I like that idea. I like that idea. I'll try to hit as close to 250 as I can. I can't guarantee 250, but I'll do my best. Sometimes it takes a year or so to stop, and so it'll go 248, 249 before it decides to stop. There we go. Bingo! Eureka! Let's go with that. Okay, so once we use it, we'll finish up the civilizations. It will kind of record those events. And bang, we're done. I'm going to hit P from right here so I can export my image and info for this world. I'll show you how to do it in case you forget to do it at this moment. It is possible to do it later. But generally speaking, hit P right here. Done. Yay. We're going to accept that world. And it will take all that stuff out of memory and write it to disk because we're not playing at the moment. Hey, hey. Generosity should always be singled out, mate. Always. Besides, you guys got to help me. That goal up at the top is team, but that's my wife and I. You got to help me get more donations than her. I mean, come on. Seriously, guys. Help me out. If we're not doing at least that good. Whew. Yikes. And remember, if you donate at least $10, I'll name a dwarf after you. 25, you can have one of the starting 7. And any amount will work for the kids. All right. So before we go any further, in terms of actually starting a real honest-to-goodness play, we'll hit start playing, but we're not actually going to start a fortress or adventurer. We're going to start in Legends mode. Now what this does is opens up a in-game browser for the historical events and information about your world. It pulls in everything that's happened along the way, all the places, people, persons, and things that have gone on, and allows you to kind of look through them. Now, if you didn't export your map and such earlier, this is the place to do it. Hit P here once you're in Legends mode. Do this before you start a fort, or you'll have to abandon your fort, and that will actually make your fort part of history at that point as well. So if you come in here in Legends mode before you start and export, you can do that here. Detailed map will allow you to export images of your world. So this is all sorts of various characteristics related to your world and how it was put together, diplomatic relations, the salinity of, I don't know, oceans? The level of detail is staggering when you get down to it. Vegetation? Really? Seriously. Elevations with water levels, including lakes and ocean floors, biomes and sites, you name it, it's all here. In addition to that, you can actually browse through the historical figures. So here is, let's see, a bronze colossus that was just killed in the year 2000 or 209. So Edom, Renowned Fist, the high sport, was a bronze colossus, one of the only ones of its kind, associated with war, strength, and metals. And he goes on, smashing people and attacking civilizations for a couple hundred years here. And this is a list of his accomplishments and events in his life. You name it. It's all there. So, if you're one of those folks who's really wants to hear about, all the different people that, got killed by your bronze colossus who comes to visit later on, write the name down, pop out into Legends, and you can get the backstory of your invaders, for example, if you want to really know it. And here is the list of civilizations and groups are enemies to him, and his 130 notable people slain when they were born and when they died at his hand. And there is an extensive list. 147 other random animals and associated nonsense kills. That's all the livestock in all the places he trashed, basically. And there's all kinds of this stuff. Artifacts that were created. Here, this is a legendary platinum slab that exists in the world somewhere. A bronze fiend and becoming a permanent part of the living world in order to sow the seeds of chaos. Dun, dun, dun. There you go. Kezat aided that fiend. There you go. Terrible Kezat. Okay, so deities, structures, historical maps, you name it, it's all here. The events of everything in the time before time, and then eventually as history starts and picks up, you can see wars and such kicking off and ending. Now, this is a useful thing, but at the same time, it's not really the best way to do this. Let's see if these tools are still working out here. Let's go out here to Legends Viewer. I don't know if Legends Viewer... I think this will work. Let's start this up. I'm not sure which of these is correctly up to date for version 43.03, so my apologies in advance if one of these bombs out on us here, guys. But Legends Viewer will allow you to open up the Legends files that we exported just a moment ago. Oops. We need to export the XML archive as well, and I forgot to do that. So hang on, we bounce back into Dwarf Fortress real fast and take care of that. So in addition to the map and generation info, I also have to export the XML dump in order to have the files that the Legends viewers will need to parse. So down there at the bottom, you'll see XML dump. We'll do the XML dump real fast, and then I'll bail out. That takes a moment. Don't panic if Dwarf Fortress acts like it's not responding. That's completely normal. It is not a fast process. We'll find out if that's actually working in this version. I hope it is, because it's really nice to be able to show it to you guys. Well, we're trying. Keep in mind, the larger your history, the longer it will take for this process to complete. Okay, there we go. Now that that's done, I can go back to Legends Viewer here. We can close the map rejection log. I don't need it anymore. We can close whatever I was opening there. Don't need that anymore either. Let's see, is any of this other stuff bad? Yeah, we don't need any of these. Okay, good. Okay, so in Legends Viewer, we'll pop out here. We'll go to my game folder. Go into Dwarf Fortress, into our current folder. And you'll see here an XML document. It's region 2 because I already have a world created in this installation. If this was the first world I created, it would be region 1. But if you had 4 already created, it would have been region 5. No harm, no foul. Whichever region you have, though, you can import his XML file, and it will automatically try to import for you the other 3 files it needs. And then it will load that information back into memory, and it will allow you to browse through it and view it. It will also tell you, if you're not familiar or don't want to follow along with my steps, how to generate this stuff after the fact, if you want to know what your history looks like at that moment. And then it shows you all kinds of data about how your world is put together. So this is a combination of census and historical record, and you name it, it's here. There are 7 dwarven civilizations. Anybody have a preference on, it looks like this one's pretty small, so we probably don't want to be the part of the mirror of systems, or we're going to be the king fairly quickly. The Urn of Confusing and the Glowing Armory. I like that name, the Glowing Armory. We may do that. Let's see if we can't do those let's see if we can't make them our civilization here. Let's see, there have been 4 kings. Let's see. Ooh, looky there. We can set up a temple to Nulthag. Jewels, wealth, trade, lust, and depravity. Nice. Bacchanalia away. All right. And let's see. Anybody else that's interesting here? Yeah, the others seem pretty standard, it looks like. So the nourishing fountains, and so it looks like we've got seven dwarven deities basically for this civilization. That's what we want to stick on. The first site was destroyed by a forgotten beast. Did he get killed later? Is he still out there? No, is a forgotten beast, so he's still alive. Our ancient enemy is still out there. And this is basically a list of all the places that have been founded along the way. That's a mountain hall, and then this is just a hill dwarf site. And this is the population. There's a few outcasts of other races. Let's see. These are people who got thrown out, I assume. This lists all the livestock, so this will tell us that we do have blue peafowls available. And there are dogs and cats in our civilization. Yay! So let's see. There were historical features, historical yada yada yada. Okay. And then processions and things. Some of this stuff isn't yet implemented, as you can see here. But that's okay. It gives you the general list of exactly what's going on in your world. And you can pull up either your civilization or a given site. It will tell you where that site is. So if, for example, I wanted to know where Bridge Even was, which is going to be important if you're an adventurer and you need to go to a particular place, for example, asking directions is really vague, and this will give you a much clearer picture of where something might be located. So there's a dwarven fortress here on this chunk of the world, this being the overall world picture. And here's who lives there and so forth, and here's the events that have gone on and the deaths and their complete history and you name it. All right. So, glowing armory. All right. So noted. Nulthag Mountain Bridge. Temple. So noted. Now, let's see. We've peeked at our init files. We've discussed customizing them. We've tweaked our inits. We've poked at our raws. We've disabled aquifers. We've generated a world. We've exported its settings. We've viewed it in legends. Let's create a Dwarven Embark. Let's get started with a Dwarven Embark. And although this says start playing, we're not actually going to be playing tonight. I'll stop once we actually get our Embark set up. But let's go through what we would do to create an Embark. And I'll export the profile that I create, the stuff that I bring with me. So those of you who want to follow along at home, recreate this exact scenario as I've done it. You'll be able to do that. You'll be able to generate the exact same world, embark in the exact same spot, and create a and bring along the exact same stuff, dwarves and things, whatever you need. Okay, so let's look around here a little bit and discuss some of the pros and cons in various areas. Embarking on mountains is a little rough. There's not as much. There's not going to be any trees. There's minimal other vegetation. It actually makes it harder to survive than you might expect. I don't recommend you embark on the mountains necessarily. Embark in the foothills at the base of the mountains is much better, much easier to survive. Additionally, if you embark way out in the middle of the mountain somewhere, I'm pretty sure it can be problematic to get visitors. It can cause its own other problems. Volcanoes, represented by this little red spot here in the middle of my... I guess I should kind of show this off. This is the local map, which is a sub-region of the region map right here. And then this region is a sub-region of the entire world. You can kind of see this volcano to the southwest is that same volcano right there. You can kind of see it. So this scales down from left to the middle to the right and gets as more and more zoomed out as you go further to the right. If you want to know where in the world you're looking, you look at the right. If you want to know where you're actually going to be embarking and what sorts of terrain you're actually going to have, this is the terrain you're going to actually be embarking in. Volcanoes are nice to have. Why should the embark button be grayed out? There's nothing wrong with embarking on a volcano. Actually, I think it is possible to embark on a mountain. Nope, not in. No, you're right. So he's changed it at some point since the last time I tried it. Okay, good. So he won't stop you. Fantastic. But you can, like, for example, if I wanted to have mountain terrain, and at the same time I wanted to have trees, you wouldn't want to embark on the mountains anyway because there's no trees in the mountains. So what you would do is you'd move your regional area over here to the left, so you'd capture, the edge of the mountains, for example, and some trees, and then you'd have both biomes. And that's kind of how we're going to place our fort when we get to it. Shrubland is open and flat, generally speaking, relatively so. But at the same time, trees are fairly sparse, and wood is one of those things that's really nice to have around if you're a new player. Savanna, same deal. So in this case, where our square is located here, we have 3 biomes under that square, and I can kind of switch between them. This is the first biome, this is the second biome, and this is the third biome. None of them are particularly tree laden, if you will. There's a little more soil in the savanna and in one of the savanna areas, and the temperate and tropical grassland areas here are little soil. Okay, let's keep looking around. Let's see here. What do we got? That's so some of these things, like especially along the rivers here, for example, are actually settlements, and if you try to embark on one, it'll show you that you are over the top of a settlement. It'll warn you that you're there, and it will stop you from embarking. So you can't embark in the middle of a human city, for example. There's some deserts, and that looks like deserts adjacent to swamps, maybe? Grasslands? Okay. That's not bad. Sand, metals shallow and deep, and flux. That's not too bad. Want something with a little more trees for a new player, but that's not too bad. I love sand, for the record. Sand is one of my favorite materials because glass is not only valuable, but can be used to make all sorts of useful little things. Ooh, looky there. Tropical savanna. We're going to be kind of rare on trees, but sand, clay, shallow and deep metals. Now, you might be asking yourself as a new player what shallow and deep metals actually means. What is a shallow metal? What is a deep metal? Well, all right. Dwarf Fortress actually attempts, to some degree, to simulate geology of its worlds. And so iron only appears at certain depths in certain types of stone, in certain types of biomes, in certain types of settings. And so that's kind of a general indicator of what you're going to see. But what it doesn't tell you is whether that shallow metal there is gold, silver, and copper, or whether it's gold and iron and cassiterite, tin, or copper and iron and cassiterite, which would allow you to make bronze and iron as well. It doesn't tell you whether it's lots of iron or a little iron, or lots of gold and nothing else, or lots of gold with just a teeny bit of silver, for example. And as long as there's at least 2 metals, it'll say metals plural, even though that doesn't tell you whether they're useful for whatever you might have in mind. So, if you want to get more information about your Embark, you can come over here to DF Hack and you can type prospect. And prospect will tell you about the types of stone that you will find. So, for example, I know that we have marble, and I know that marble is a flux stone, so that's probably why the flux stone layer here is indicated. That means we would have plenty of flux stone to make steel. And if you're going to make steel at some point, flux stone is probably the biggest limitation. You can get iron in all sorts of ways, trade for it, take it off the bodies of your conquered victims, mine for it if your site has it. But getting flux stone is basically a mine for it or trade for it kind of thing. And since it's heavy, merchants tend not to carry very much of it. So if you intend to do much steel production, I highly recommend that you embark in a site with flux stone. So in addition, that lists all these other types of stones, and if you're actually curious about the geology of what they are and how they work, these are real stone types from the real world, and they work roughly approximately kind of like they really do in the real world. You can go out and look at them and learn more about geology from an afternoon at Dwarf Fortress than you ever thought possible. There are some important ones here. Sand black it means that we have sand on site that we can harvest to make glass. And sandy clay means that we have clay on site that we can harvest to make fired pots and other clayware that can be used for all sorts of various things. And those two together give us all sorts of crafting options above and beyond the standard wood, stone, metal. In addition to sand being an infinite resource in its own right. So, in addition to wood, which will regrow as an infinite resource, we now also have sand as an infinite resource. In addition to stone as a fairly bountiful resource, we have clay. You don't necessarily need those. Sand is a very nice to have, clay a little less so. Flux is nice if you plan to work with steel. If you're curious about the metals, Prospect has a second feature where you can do Prospect All. And it will tell you not only about the layers of stone, but also the ores. In this case, I know, for example, that we have hematite, which is an ore of iron, tetrahedrite, which will give us copper and silver, sphalerite, which will give us zinc, native gold, which is exactly what it says on the tin, garnierite, which is lead, galena, which is lead and silver. Okay, so that tells me roughly how much of each one I'll find, roughly how deep in the earth it would be, and an approximation for what I'm going to find on site. In addition to that, it'll tell me all about the gems on my site and a list of other miscellaneous stone that wasn't part of the layers but shows up. Bauxite is nice for its nice red color. Microcline is nice for its light blue cotton candy color. Cobaltite is a nice deep blue. If you care about the style of your fortress, having access to these colored stones might be important to you. Prospect will let you know what you're going to get. It will tell you in advance, hey, you're going to embark at depth 118. That's where you'll arrive. So, for example, if I arrived at 118 and the topmost hematite were at 117, then that means, or at 123, excuse me, that means that where we embark is literally right in the middle of the iron band in terms of height. There'll be iron above us and iron below us in terms of our elevation. Likewise, this lists where you'll find the galena and the gold if we care about finding gold and silver later on. And since we're going to have a temple to the god of wealth and depravity, you better believe we're going to have gold temple fixtures, buddy. So in this case, I really do care about having iron on site because I do want to be able to show new players, the iron production chain. I think it's important to understand how to make bronze and how to make iron for new players because those are the mid-grade, most common weaponizable metals, if you will. In terms of other civilizations, goblins crank out iron and humans crank out iron. Elves stick to wood. Humans will also use bronze. Dwarves are the only folks who make steel. So if you're not making steel, you're not a dwarf. I mean, you should probably look into that. If you don't have iron on site, your sources of iron get fairly limited. You can trade for iron bars. You can trade for iron ore. You can harvest the weapons of the fallen, melt them down into iron bars, and process them from there. But that's about it. And unfortunately, the stuff you get off your kills, at least to start, and the stuff you trade for, again, at least to start, aren't really enough to run a really big ironworks. Later on, we will be processing bars basically as fast as they can bring them in if we so desire. And trading for it alone probably would not be able to satiate our insatiable demand for more gold fixtures for our lust and gems and greed god, right? Okay. Skulls for the skull throne and gold for this guy. We're going to love him. He's great. All right. So that gives us what we've got here. So let's put a note here. Let's note this site here for a moment. And we can do that by putting a note. And it's warning us that the note will only be saved once we do our fort. But I'm not really worried about that. What I'm really concerned about was that this allows us to come back to this spot later if we want. So we're going to consider that site number 1 there, or approximately there. And we'll, let's see, save that. Use that symbol's fine with me. Go back to the list. And then we can move away from our node. And you can see it kind of flashing there, so it's a reminder, hey, this is where we found that spot we might want to consider for a site. Purple terrain needs a special mention here. Let's go back over here to the, let's hit escape and go back to the main display here. Purple terrain is evil, generally speaking, in my tile set. So this is evil terrain. You'll see it as sinister, wicked, or terrifying. For example, down here at the bottom of the map is probably a terrifying glacier. Oh, it's haunted. Haunted. All right. So sinister, and then haunted is a little stronger than that. let's see, then this is probably good aligned. Yeah, Joyous Wilds is high savagery and good. Oh, Nirruden, wait. What is this savagery and okay, so stop. Let's back up another step and go back out to the wiki in here. Let's talk about surroundings in addition to biomes. So we already talked about the terrain types you get, right? Your biomes. Your biomes actually control like what types of animals you'll see. Coniferous forests have different animals in them than deserts. Okay? But in addition to that, evil and good have some additional control. So although these things appear in all temperate broadleaf forests, evil ones can also have this stuff, and good ones can also have that stuff, for example. Additionally, if we look at some of these, all temperate broadleaf forests can have these, but if they have high savagery, they may also have this, and if they have if they have some evil to them, they may have this. So an evil, highly savage broadleaf forest could have everything in this list, and it all stacks. So knowing where you're embarking and how that works will determine what types of critters you may encounter. That's nice to know. You can find that in the surroundings article. So as you can see, this is basically a crosshatch between the good axis, and the savagery axis. So what I'm really looking for is something in the good or neutral category. Evil has some problems that we'll get into in just a moment. And I want fairly savage, so I want neutral or better. I'm not really worried about a serene or calm. For a new player, on the lower end of things is better than not, and evil is probably right out. Evil will make your game significantly more difficult. You'll notice that they kind of devote 2 sentences to good and neutral, and then there's a paragraph and a half to all the shit you're going to have to deal with evil. Welcome to Dwarf Fortress. When you're ready for it, it's there. But there's all sorts of problems that you're going to have to fight. In addition to understanding how to set up a fortress, there's all kinds of additional problems that you're going to have to deal with in evil terrain. Rains that can make your dwarves into undead on the spot. Reanimating undead that will come back when you butcher your livestock. They can come back to kill your dwarves. Their their skins can come back and suffocate your dwarves. All kinds of stuff that you need to be aware of. Even the most mild evil has a lot of these features and should be considered extremely dangerous for a new player. That said, I'm going to try and embark someplace fairly savage, which generally means that we're going to get a little more of a romp than a passive spot. Usually. It's no guarantee. High savagery means that we may see we may see some animal people, for example, tiger men, for example, in addition to the giant tiger and the regular tiger, for example. Distinctive flora and fauna from these particular areas. Of particular note are the plants, sliverbarb, staring eyeball, and wormy tendril, particularly sliverbarb, which can be used for dye. And up here we have sunberry, which makes one of the more valuable drinks. And the bubble bulb and downy grass are just features. You don't use them for anything. Ditto with the tendril and eyeball. They're just decoration, if you will. Feather trees are only seen in good areas. Glumprong is only seen in evil areas, and so on. Okay. So our original site, I guess I should have gone through that while we were over there. Let's bounce back to that for a second. Let's go back over to our original site, and I'll kind of run through what we would see if we were embarking here, just as a one-off. So this is a wilderness, which is a middle-of-the-range savagery neutral area. So this would be acceptable to me. Sparse trees isn't really ideal, and other vegetation moderate isn't perfect, but, that's doable. If you compared that to, say, for example, this randomly selected chunk of desert here, you can see that the temperature here is cooler, but the trees are probably rarer, and the vegetation is rarer because it's a desert instead of a shrubland. And the surroundings are untamed wilds, which is a highly savage neutral area. So, except for the trees and the other vegetation, that's actually not too bad. I kind of like that. Let's see. In fact, why don't we do that? Why don't we do something in the red sandy desert? Let's get something on the edge where we can get another biome in play. Oh, looky there, a river and multiple biomes in play all together. Oh, I like it. Let's do that. Okay. So we'll have red sand in the far east, and I need to find out if that... let's see. So biome 1, that's our desert. Okay. I like that. Let's see if we can make this work. There's flux stone in the plains, so a lot of our map has some flux. In fact, the right-hand half of our map looks like it's going to have flux, which is good. There are 3 biomes in play. Our sand desert, which is highly savage desert. Our temperate grassland 1 and our temperate grassland 2 are both the same biome. It's just broken up into slightly different regions, basically. Sub-regions, if you will. They'll have the same rough materials in both the grassland chunks. Now, this is going to mean that that trees are kind of sparse. That's kind of a bummer for the new folks. Let's make a note here. We'll make this one Site 2. We'll consider this one in a moment and come back to it if we need to. Okay, so now we've got one there. Now, if you don't want to find these, let's say you're in a hurry. I guess I should have gone through this at the beginning. You can go to the site finder, which will allow you to specify the kind of characteristics you want. But if I specify medium, high will get ruled out, and I want both. So there's not a way to say at least or, no more than, for example, if I wanted medium or low. But let's see what we can find in terms of high savagery. Low evil is good, for the record. Elevation, I don't care about. Temperature, I don't care about. Rain, I don't care about. Drainage, fluxstone, yes. Aquifer, no. Not that it matters because nothing in our world has aquifers. Do I need a river? Let's leave that alone for now. Shallow, let's do multiple. Deep, let's do multiple. Soil, this is... let's look for deep soil because why not? And let's see if we can't find some clay. And then we can have the game actually search for a site that matches those. And it will look through the world for all the sites that could potentially match that terrain. Now, obviously, if I set this too low, it won't find anything at all. So there may be no terrain out there for us to work with. There may be no site that meets all these characteristics, and we may have to revise our settings a little bit. But as it flashes there, I notice some green X's that are appearing in various places out there, which makes me suspect that we may be able to find the terrain we're looking for in at least some of the map. All right. Looking good. We'll let that search complete. It's almost done now. There we go. Okay. And then we can browse through the results here. So we can hit escape to browse through the results, and that'll kind of, where you see it flashing over here in the world map and in the region map are the terrains that matched our criteria, the spots we were looking for. Now, obviously, the site finder can't find everything. It doesn't know whether there's a volcano present. It doesn't know whether there's, a necromancer tower directly adjacent to your ideal spot. You may run into all kinds of problems, if you are looking for very specific terrain or features that aren't shown in the finder. Manipulating your world gen settings and then applying the finder will allow you to search your worlds fairly quickly for generic stuff that you're looking for, though, and it's useful to do. So let's see here. This is all, grasslands and savannas and badlands? Yeah, so I'm not really interested in badlands, and this looks like glacier. Oh, ocean. Yeah. We're not going to embark on the ocean and tundra today, unfortunately. That said, if one of you is feeling froggy and wants to drop a good chunk of money, I've got a little thing out there where it'll let you donate, and I'll embark any place you like. But you'd have to donate to the kids first. So let's see, what else do we have here? Looks like there's a spot northeast of where we initially had our site 2. What's this? Sand desert. And temperate grasslands. And it looks like probably the grasslands is the... Oh, no, looky there. Rocky Wasteland has it too. And if it wasn't for all that grassland, I'd be all over that. White on rice. Let's see. What's up north here by the mountains? That looks like glacier. I don't want that. All right, let's see if this swamp will do for us. Let's see what we can find right in there. So let's move over to the blue swamp that's flashing right there. Is that marsh or swamp? Marsh. And it's really savage, so that's good. I like really savage. Okay. Did we get multiple metals? Because I did want multiple metals here, guys. So let's see. We have temperate savanna and temperate freshwater marsh. The savanna has shallow and multiple shallow and deep, and the freshwater marsh has our flux stone. So let's see if we can't find something suitably on the boundary of those two. Right there looks pretty promising. That looks nice. That has some soil in both of them and multiple metals. So let's prospect this one a little bit, see what we get, because I like him. He's nice and savage. Oops, let's do prospect all, because I care about the metals, remember. Okay, so out here, let's see. We've got black sand, that's our sand, and clay, good. Limestone is a flux. We have marble and limestone, so plenty of flux to go around. But we have no iron. Tetra doesn't give us iron here. Okay, so let's look at the other biome. That's the marsh. Let's see what we get there. I don't remember if prospect is biome specific still or not. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so no iron there, which is kind of a bummer. I could show you guys bronze, but we'd be out of luck when we went to do iron. Okay, let's clear our find results and do a different find. High savagery. I don't care about evil for now. We won't embark in an evil terrain. I do want flux. Multiple, deep clay. Let's see if we can find it that way. Looks like we found a couple spots maybe already right off the bat that may meet our criteria that we didn't find the first time around, so that's good. Find us a nice spot that we can do this in. Now, see what I'd really like to do for tomorrow. After so in addition to getting a fort up and running and showing you guys how I generally do that, and touching on all the myriad necessities that go into that. At some point, I'd like to do for fun. I'd like to build a tower or something on the surface so that we, when I export this, there's a visible thing that you guys could go to as adventurers, or that you could see when you reclaim the fort as fortress mode. That'd be kind of nice. We haven't really done that in the past. We kind of get distracted with all the work that goes into a fort, and the fact that I get tired by about hour 27. I mean, at some point, and then we never quite get around to the mega project, and I'd kind of like to do one. So since we opened up our settings a little bit more, there's a little more variety to choose from now. How about that? Temperate woodland, untamed wild, sand and clay with plenty of soil, shallow and deep metals, and flux. Prospector, make me a match. Find me a find. Let's see here. We have limonite. That's iron. And I don't need a huge amount. I just need a little bit so I can demonstrate. I don't mind living off my iron that I conquer for. But I'd kind of like to be able to show you guys how the mine and refine cycle works. In addition to that, we have tetrahedrite and cassiterite, which means I can show you guys bronze. In addition to the bronze we bring with us, we'll have a bronze industry. We have gold and silver and copper. So we have all the precious metals, including platinum, which is a little rare. Platinum is a little harder to come by and is incredibly valuable. Let's see. Doesn't look like we have aluminum, which is kind of a shame, but oh well. You usually don't have much aluminum anyway. Okay, down here in the other vein stone, microcline is almost universal. We've got mica, that's nice. Cinnabar is a nice red color. And cobaltite is a nice dark blue. So not too shabby there. Okay, we've got color if we want to mess around with color later. That's not too bad. Okay. I think we could make a go of this. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as Site 3, and we'll embark here. Well, not this exact spot. I want to move this around a little bit. So I want to include the river, for example. So we're going to shuffle this up here a bit. And yeah, why not? We'll do it right there at the river fork. Is this a stream? Yes, it is. Oh, but if we go all the way up there, we lose our sand. Oh, that's no good. So let's see. Where do we get the sand back? Right there. So we'll have to embark down this way a little bit. That's okay. That's not too bad. So that's that one, and then that's the one with the flux. So that's the one we really care about. So let's go over a couple steps and then down a little more. up. And we'll embark right there on that river bend, because why not, right? And we'll have a little variation where there's some flux there. So let's see what the variation gets us here. It'll be close to the original picture because it won't vary too much, but the materials will change up a little. Nothing too bad. We get a little more iron, we get a little less platinum. Gold drops back a little bit. Lots of zinc crafts. We'll be able to turn out zinc crafts going out of style, pretty much. Okay. Plenty of sand and materials here, it looks like. That's good. Good. Yep, this will work. Let's do this. This will be site number 3, and I'll put a note here, and then we'll go from this. Oops. What did I do? We just moved all over the place. Oh, I jumped crossed over there. Damn it! Lost where we were. Poop. About in here somewhere, wasn't it? See if I can spot it. Hey, looky there. All right. Let's try this again. This time with 100% less fuck up, let's hope. First, we'll clear our find results because we don't care about any of that. Then we will take a note, and we will add a note. Enter text, site number 3. And we'll embark right there. Go back to the list, and if y'all wanted to see the different places we considered to know what we were looking at and for, here's a list of all of them. You can basically jump down through each one. Okay. So let's go back to our spot here. I'll make sure we're all good and lined up. We'll hit embark. I have the warning turned on, so we'll come back and go, hey, are you really sure? We're only going to rescue once, and we're good. Now, this is where we're going to get to set up what we're going to bring with us, all the stuff we take. And those of you who've played every hardcore survival game in the world love this phase of the game. So we're going to prepare carefully. We're going to create from scratch a complete collection of gear. And the first thing to do when we're saying from scratch is I get rid of everything, every little item, all the drinks, all the seeds, all the food. Even though we're going to bring some of it back later, we're getting rid of it, all of it right now because I don't want any of it. Gone. Poof. Completely clear. Just our initial embark points and nothing more. Now, before we actually start adding items, it's worth noting that your skills for your dwarves also take points. I want to bring a couple of miners along with me, although we will quickly get past needing just 2. I want to bring a carpenter, and he needs to be fairly skilled. I want to bring a mason, and he needs to be fairly skilled, because we're going to make wood and stone furniture fairly quickly. I'm going to need to bring a grower so I can plant farm crops, which are essential for producing the food to feed ourselves. And this guy I kind of want to have a subspecialty. I want him to have herbalist as well. There may be some rarer crops that I want to harvest, and I'll have to harvest those from the surface, from the wild. I'll need an herbalist to pick those plants properly and get them harvested so that we can grow them inside our fortress later. Since we embarked in very savage terrain, that would include whipvine, and whipvine makes fantastic alcohol. So we're going to look into making sure that we can produce that. Over here, let's see, we've got everybody doing one of those. Let's see, let's get a stone crafter going. That's not the same as a mason. Stone crafters make small tools, and masons make giant furniture. And let's go back over here. We've got a stone crafter, we've got a mason, got a carpenter, we've got some miners. What do we got here? Oh, a doctor. Why not? Let's bring a doctor along with us. Everybody should have a doctor, right? Right? Sure. Yeah. So let's give this guy some diagnostic skill. Teach him to dress wounds and commit surgery on people and do bones and even stitch wounds. Okay, so let's back him down just a hair. And he's now an adequate across the board doctor. Yay! Let's back him down a hair. Let's do suturer as novice, and let's back down wound dresser at novice as well. Wow. Okay. And then we will go down here. We got to give everybody at least one rank of discipline so that they can handle being around corpses and the dead at least a little bit. And for our doctor, we kind of want to give him... Pretty sure Toady implemented teacher since the last time I played properly, because we have all the new education skills. I'm pretty sure I want this guy to be able to teach his skills, and I don't remember there being a separate scholar skill per se. So we will make him a writer. That will let him create books for us when we get to that point, hopefully to enable him to teach and discuss his doctoring skill to better spread it through the community. It would be really nice if we had a collection of doctors rather than trying to rely on just a doctor, and if those doctors were at least moderately skilled. I know that some of these things have been implemented since the last time I originally did this, so we're going to have to investigate some of that and kind of do some of it on the fly. I don't know off the top of my head whether novice writer or novice teacher would be better here, and frankly, it probably doesn't matter because it's one level anyway. So we're going to go ahead and go back over here. We'll give this guy each of these guys a level of discipline because that will let them handle burial, for example. Oh, excuse me. All right, so let's look at Sazkul here for a minute. So I believe as of this point, I only have one donation in the range of the starting 7. So, Lack and Fear, did you have a particular name you wanted for your dwarf? Any preference as to which one of my starting 7 he'll be? I mean, it's up to you, man. You donated. If you've got no preference, I'll just carry on. But I want to make sure folks get something back for their donation. It's nice. Something I can do. You got it. Any preferences as to which one of the 7? Guy, gal, which trade? Okay, that sort of kind of vaguely resembled English. Oh, no pref. Okay, there we go. All right. Now I understand what we're doing. All right, so this guy is going to get his name here. Let's customize him a little bit. All right, and one of our starting 7 has a name. 6 more, folks. Better get in there now. Okay, so we've set up some of the skills for our dwarves. In addition to those, I generally like to have I think this is my grower. Yep. I generally like to have my grower have a skill like weaponsmith because we'll use him early on to make tools. We'll give our stonecrafter, although it won't be his primary goal, we'll give him armorsmith in case we decide to make some early armor. We'll give our novice crafter, or our novice carpenter, some wood crafting skill so that he can make bolts and such for us if we decide to go that route. Go back to our miners, and let's see. What else can we have you guys do that would be useful? Oh, I know what we don't have. Oh, I know. Turn him into a glass worker. Where the hell did they stash glass working? There it is. And he won't need to be particularly good at it. So we'll do both of these guys as glass makers. We have sand on site. If we can get to magma relatively quickly, we'll be able to crank out whatever we want in glass. So these guys will rocket through skill levels at that point if we decide to make them full-time glass workers. In addition to being reasonably valuable for trade, glass can be made into all kinds of useful tools. It's more versatile than clay. Now, in addition to stuff, you also have to bring animals, and it's worth noting that animals have sexual orientation, so some of your dogs won't do their job, so bring 2 males. I don't care about the cats necessarily doing their job, so I'm going to bring 1 of each. Same thing applies to sheep. I want to make sure I have a female and a male who will actually mate and start producing lambs, because if they don't, they're not good for much other than meat and wool to me at that point. 2 peacocks and a few peahens. The reason I'm bringing more women than men should be fairly self-explanatory for those of you who understand reproductive science at all. It gives me about 800 points left. Let's go back over and talk about gear for a minute. Before you put anything else in your wagon, before you consider any other piece of gear, before you do anything else at this point, bring an anvil. Period. Full stop. Bring an anvil. No anvil, no metalworking. And the first time you can get an anvil in trade is autumn, which means it's 2.5 or nearly 3 seasons before you'll even see the ability to make metal any other way. Bring an anvil. If you're wanting to challenge yourself, hey, knock yourself out. Go for it. I've done it both intentionally and unintentionally, and survived it both intentionally and unintentionally. But it's for a new player, it's not something you want to discover after the fact. Bring an anvil. Make it the first thing you put in your wagon. Period. After you do that, I strongly recommend you bring some basic stone and materials to do your stone working. And so in the stone category, you could find them, or you could just search for copper. In this case, we're looking for copper nuggets, and there's a few other choices if we don't have copper nuggets. So let's see here. Did we get copper nuggets? Are there any? Nope. Copper nuggets are not available. So if we can't do copper nuggets, we can do malachite, which is no copper there either. We can do native, if we have it, which doesn't look like we have native copper either. Bummer. We can do, unfortunately, tetrahedrite is a little more expensive. It's 9 per instead of 6 per, but we'll get some silver along with it. So this fortress, instead of just battle axes and spears, for example, we'll probably do battle axes for trees and hammers for people. And we can make the hammers out of the silver we get from the tetrahedrite, which is nice. So we'll add some cassiterite to that. That's tin. So the copper from the tetrahedrite and the tin from the cassiterite gives us bronze. And the silver left over can be used to make hammers. So that's all good. Now we'll add some coal if we have it. If we don't have coal, then what you'll want is lignite. And if you don't have coal or lignite, yikes, then you're going to want to bring charcoal or wood so that you can make fuel from those. Since we do have bituminous coal, it's preferable. You get a better conversion ratio out of coal than you do out of lignite. You get a better ratio out of lignite than you do out of wood. So generally speaking, something with copper in it, and I want to bring quite a few of these. Something with tin in it, again, I want to bring a few of these. Something with coal or lignite in it if you can get them. Otherwise, charcoal and wood. And although we could build a wood furnace and create some charcoal and then start our smelter cycle, to get started quickly, I recommend bringing a unit of coke or charcoal, which perform the same way. They perform the same function. Coke is easy to remember, though. Everybody remembers Coke. Thank you, Coca-Cola Company, for ruining the mining and refining process for all of us for the rest of time. Coke is a fuel. It's a refined coal. When we refine our coal, we will make more coke. So the way this is going to work, at least for this piece of our embark, is we're going to take this coke and we're going to build a smelter. We're going to throw some coal and this coke in the smelter, and we're going to make more coke. We're going to take that coke, and in addition to making coke on top of that, we're going to also use that coke to refine the ores into bars, and those bars into tools. Now, ordinarily, I would do a particular trick, which I'll show you later, that we can't do this time because I don't have a pure copper ore. If we had malachite, if we had native copper, if we had copper nuggets, I would be able to make copper tools right off the bat. If I was willing to settle for copper alone instead of making bronze, I could ditch the cassiterite and make copper and silver. Copper battle axes aren't quite as good as weapons as bronze battle axes, but they work just fine for trees. And since we were going to make hammers for the people, that could theoretically work, and we would save a little bit of money doing that. But I do want to show you how to make bronze, because I think bronze is probably the metal that new players should probably shoot for out of the gate for their initial tools. It's very easy to get a bronze cycle set up. It's relatively inexpensive. You can do iron or even steel right off the bat if you want, but it is fairly expensive to do. It costs a huge number of embark points to bring iron. To bring this copper-bearing ore tetrahedrite, which is, remember, is copper and silver, so copper alone would be 6 points each. This is 9 points each. To bring iron ore, something like limonite, is 24 per, so it's literally 4 times as expensive as copper. And if we're bringing bronze, which is 6 copper ores, it's at least twice as expensive as bringing the materials for bronze as well. I could bring enough to make huge amounts of bronze compared to iron. In terms of efficiency, if you're not doing a modded embark where you're starting with a huge number of embark points, just stay away from iron to start. And steel is right out. As expensive as iron is, steel is far and away more expensive than that. So stick with bronze unless you're playing with a modded embark. Like if you really just want to mess around with how to make iron or how to make steel, for example. That's the efficient, effective way. If you're really cheapskating, like for example, if you have a lot of additional supplies you have to bring and you really need to cut down on your costs, then ditch the tin and go for go for tetrahedrite if you can find it, or a raw copper ore if you can't, and you can at least make silver hammers and copper axes to cut your trees. Because unlike my prior tutorials where you could cut trees with a wooden axe, that is no longer the case in Dwarf Fortress. Your tools must now have an edge to cut trees, and that means we won't harvest a single tree until we've got at least a copper battle axe. So that's why I'm part of the reason why we're bringing this iron or this bronze with us to start. Now, in addition to those raw materials, I strongly recommend you bring some logs. Even if you're embarking in a swamp, even if you're embarking in a heavily forested area, I usually bring a few logs. And the reason is because while you can disassemble your wagon for logs, it scatters your crap all over the ground and it's annoying and hideous to look at. And I'm kind of obsessive compulsive about it, so I like to keep my stuff in the wagon until I'm ready to empty it all out and finally disassemble the thing. The notion of disassembling the wagon with the stuff still in it offends me somehow. I'm not sure exactly why. You can all now comment on my psychosis for just a moment. Give me just a second here, guys. All right, so in terms of logs, I like to bring feather wood, if we have it, because it's white. Makes nice, pretty white beds. If you can't get it, I like to bring tower cap, just because why not? That's mushroom fungus that our dwarves would have. That's appropriate. Why not? Let's do it. So I'm not going to bring too much. We are embarking in a relatively forested area. I need a few logs to get me started, perhaps, but not a whole lot. I do need to bring some regular stone, and generally speaking, I like my stone that I bring at the start to be magma safe. And those of you who are not familiar with the term, allow me to include you in. If you go out here to the wiki and search magma safe, you will actually find an article on what is or is not magma safe in the current version. And magma safe materials are basically those which, when touched to lava, do not melt. And that's important if you're going to work with magma fairly early on. It's useful to have a few of these even if your site might not have them. So for example, if I were embarking in a site that had no magma safe minerals whatsoever, if I didn't bring any magma safe minerals with me, the only source of magma safe minerals I would have would be those I could trade for. Now, it's not entirely common to find a spot that has no magma safe ore and none that you brought with you, because there's a lot of things that you can make that are magma safe once they are made. Iron and copper, a lot of these ores, for example, that we have on our site are already magma safe without me having to do anything with them. Sphalerite, hematite, cassiterite, magma safe across the board. Mica, I'm pretty sure we had mica in our list. It's magma safe. Gabbro I like to bring with me. Don't ask me why. Gabbro just stuck with me when I was a new player. Disassembling a tool that they're using to store goods sounds very dwarfish. I have to concur, but at the same time, it doesn't sound very sensible, and I'm a sensible sort of player. Gabbro, for whatever reason, stuck with me. Something about the name was just funny, and I've remembered it ever since. That's usually the stone I bring. It's fairly common. I don't think I've ever had a site that didn't have Gabbro available on Embark, but there are a whole host of these that you could theoretically bring, which are the same cost. Obviously, if you start bringing metals and ores, those are more expensive. Nethercap is not going to be something you'll have right off the start. Ditto with all these special stuff. The special leathers and bones, you're not going to have those. While you could theoretically bring green glass blocks and use them in place of stone, the stone can be used either to build furniture or to build workbenches, or then after I disassemble the workbenches, I could turn around and use it to build furniture or blocks on top of that. And if I brought the blocks, in addition to being more expensive, they would also only have one function, and that would be to build constructions and such. Personally, I just think you're better off to bring some stone. And you don't have to bring a lot. There will be stone on site, obviously. If you're planning to pierce an aquifer, make sure you have the materials to do so. It is really, really rough to arrive on a site with an aquifer, not have the materials to do so, and have to survive rough in the wild on the surface with what you can pick with your hands. It's theoretically doable, but not necessarily an experience I would recommend to a new player unless you just really want to experience the game's motto. So I pack a few Gabbro stones. Okay, now that's basic construction materials and basic tool materials to get us up and running. That's basically all we need to have our industry portions up and running. But that's not sustenance, and it won't keep our dwarves alive. So I like to add different types of fish, and I'll go into why in just a second. So we're going to add several different kinds of fish. We're not going to add a large number of any one, but we're going to add a bunch of different kinds. And I'm going to discuss a trick you can pull in World Gen or in Embarking to make your life a little easier. Let's see. In addition to that, we'll need to bring some drinks, and again, I'm going to bring every type that's available here. Now, when you embark in your world, if it warns you that you don't have a particular type of fish, don't panic. You can either add more of a different kind of fish, or add a different kind of meat, or something to replace the fish. It's not going to hurt anything. Don't sweat it. If you're embarking in the exact same world, I think it will come back and tell you that you have the same kinds of fish, but don't quote me. We're going to add a fair number of each of these, actually. And in older, I'm going to add 11 of each. I believe that food stacks 5 to a barrel, and drinks are 10 to a barrel. I may have it backwards. Doesn't matter, but either 5 or 10 is a break point, and the 11th item gets its own barrel. Now, the reason why that's important, or useful, I guess I should say, not necessarily important. The reason why that's useful, so I'm going to add one. I'm just going to leave the rest of these at, oops. I'm just going to leave the rest of these at 1 each. The reason why that's useful is that although we're bringing if I had 60 pond turtles, that would fit in 6 barrels. But if I bring a handful of different kinds of fish, some pond turtles, some lobster, some cave fish, some bullhead, they don't mix it together. So I get all the extra barrels. So it's 1 barrel or 2 barrels for the turtle, and then 2 more barrels for the fish, then 2 more barrels for the bullhead, and 2 more barrels for the perch, and 2 more for the molly, and so forth and so on and so such. Now that's useful because after the first unit of fish gets eaten out of that barrel, I have an empty barrel, and I didn't pay anything for that barrel. It came with the fish, so I get it for free. And you may notice if you go in here to add barrels by yourself that barrels are actually fairly expensive. They're not cheap. 10 units for a barrel. That's compared to the 2 units for a unit of fish. So it's a whole lot cheaper to add some fish than it is to add an additional barrel. There you go, kids. There's your trick for the day. Now, the same applies to drinks. Generally speaking, I'm going to make Dwarven wine the staple drink in my fortress because plump helmets are easy to grow, and we'll bring a fair amount of it. But I'll want to bring some of the others as well. We're going to do about 21 of each of these so that we have an ample supply here to get us started. And we have a variety, and the additional unit gets its own barrel, meaning that we end up with one more barrel, if you will, than we might otherwise have ended up with, which is useful. Like I said, you can store stuff in those. Now, we're starting to run low on points, so I'm probably going to have to back some of this down a little bit, but that's okay. Go back to seeds. We're going to add seeds so that we can plant crops once we arrive. This is necessary for sustenance. Well, I won't say necessary. You could live off animals and hunting, for example, but it's probably a good idea to be able to harvest stuff, harvest your own crops. In addition to that, we need, let's see, some thread. Silk thread is a little harder to come by at the start, and occasionally, although rarely, you will get a mood that requires silk early on, and I'll go into moods when we have our first one on stream tomorrow. But the gist of it is that I'm going to bring some thread as a precaution in case our first guy needs some of it. I don't have to bring much. We'll harvest some. We'll get some in trade fairly quickly, and we won't have to worry about it at that point. Now we do have back the rum down so that we can ask ourselves the question: why is the rum always gone? And we'll get rid of some of the beer, and I'm going to get rid of some of this fish as well. Need to free up some points for some other stuff. Sand. Sand is useful for the same reason that drinks are useful, although each sand gets its own bag, and so you don't have to worry about multiple types. So in this case, I'm going to bring about 20 sand. Now, some of you out there may be asking yourself, why are you bringing sand if you're embarking on a place with sand? And the answer is, I get the free bag. The sand comes in a bag, I get the bag. And the bags are, just like the barrels, expensive. In addition, once I've used the sand to make a glass object, for example, or to make glass gems, for example, I'll have the bag and can use the bag for other things, harvesting rock nuts, filling up with more sand to make more glass items. The free bag will come in handier than the free barrels, and the free barrels are useful. So, especially if you're going to embark on a spot with sand, because at that point you can start a sand industry basically as fast as you can get a furnace up and running, which means you can crank out some really useful tools really, really early if you are so inclined. In addition to racking up your trade value and triggering invasions far earlier than you might like. So, some caution. Let's see. In addition to the thread silk, we're going to take some thread yarn. Not much, just a little, in case somebody needs one piece of it or something. And again, thread plant. And although we will make some of these fairly early ourselves, having a couple of them around for emergencies isn't a bad thing on the off chance that you get your mood before your caravan. Once again, we're starting to run low on points, and each one of the seeds is going to cost us some, so we may have to back some other stuff down here. No biggie. Plenty of room to play with. Oops. Cave wheat, and we're starting to run out of points. So, let's see. Let's get rid of some of the bullhead. Not much, just some. And some of the cave. No, we'll bring the cave fish. We'll get rid of some of the... what else do we have we can get rid of? I can back down the logs a little bit. I don't need quite that many because we're embarking in a forested area. I could back down the stone. This tetrahedrite is more expensive than the copper ores because of the silver. That's part of what's eating up my point allocation. You'd have a lot more points to play with at this point if you were dealing in copper because you'd have 3 times 15. It's 45 more points than I do. Now we don't need everything. Dimple cups, I only need 1. And I can back down the sand if we're willing to sacrifice some of our early bags. That'll get us a few points to get the rock nuts back up a little bit. We'll get rid of the pigtail thread because it's expensive. We'll just take our chances with that. We'll get rid of the yarn. We'll keep the silk, though, because silk is a little harder to harvest. Basically, we theoretically could shear one of our sheep to get yarn, so we can skip that one. And we'll have pigtails basically as soon as our first pigtail harvest comes of age, which is probably going to be in summer, which is fairly early, so we can get around that one too. But silk is only harvested in the caverns, and early dwarves aren't really normally set up to really deal with the caverns if there should happen to be something hostile therein. So we'll bring some silk with us so we've got it, and the others we can make if we need them. That frees up the points for the rock nuts we wanted. I only need to bring 1 dimple cup just to make sure I have access to it. If I really want to produce more dimple cups, I plant dimple cups, I make dye, I get more dimple cup seeds, I plant more dimple cups, and that process can repeat indefinitely. Dye is not an essential priority, and you can trade for dimple cups later if you need it. You may decide you don't even want to use dimple cup dye, in which case if you want to use a different color, for example, you're going to use some other different vegetable or different plant for the dye, and at that point dimple cups are useless to you. So 1 is usually all I bring in terms of dye. The other seeds, plump helmets, pigtails, cave wheat, sweet pods, and rock nuts, are all versatile and foodstuff producing, so you want to make sure you bring plenty of all of them. Plump helmets are pretty much the legendary dwarven staple. Everybody eats plump helmets. If you're a dwarf, you eat plump helmets. It's just that simple. You can brew them to make dwarven wine. You can cook them to make food. They can be eaten raw to produce seeds. They're generally food and drink producing staples. Pigtails can be brewed, but can't be eaten. They do, however, get made into cloth, thread, like that pigtail thread that we saw a moment ago. So we want to make sure we bring enough to get our cloth industry up and running, and we can brew any that we want as well if we are so inclined. Cave wheat can be brewed into alcohol and milled into flour, but can't be eaten raw. Sweet pods can be milled into sugar and I forget what the technical term is, made into syrup. Rock nuts can be pressed into oils and can be used to make quarry bushes, which are the most productive food staple. Quarry bush leaves, in fact, can be used to make some incredibly valuable food for trade, as well as hugely quantity food if you're trying to produce large quantities of meals. Rock nuts are a great thing to bring along. I wouldn't give up my plump helmets for rock nuts, but rock nuts and pigtails are probably my second and third choices here, respectively. Cave wheat and sweet pods are nice, but not necessarily things I am essentially having to have. Dimple cups are way down at the bottom of the list. Okay, so let's look back through the categories. We don't need meat. We brought fish. We don't need eggs. We don't need plants. We can plant our own plump helmets or harvest some vegetables if we need them. Training weapons are more expensive to bring than bringing the wood, so I would just, if I really wanted them, I would bring the wood and then make them. Ammo, again, same deal. It's cheaper to bring the ore, make the copper, take the copper and make copper bolts than it is to buy a copper bolt. You get a copper bolt for 2. You could get 25 for 50. For that same 50, I could have several copper ores, make half a dozen copper bars, and then produce from those 100 plus copper bolts. So it's not even a contest. Anytime there's a question, bring the raw goods, make the stuff on site. Exception. You are embarking someplace very hostile where you need to get your stuff underground as quick as possible, where you may experience military conflict as soon as you embark. If you're embarking someplace where you expect to have trouble, it might behoove you to bring a weapon, even a training weapon, rather than the raw materials. If you are accosted by giant monkeys right off the bat, even a training axe is better than nothing. Dwarves can't punch crap. Imagine being bitten to death by a 4-year-old. That's your average dwarf. Okay? Okay, yeah, all right. Your dwarves are a little stronger than that, but size-wise, mass-wise, they're not a competitor on the predator scale until they're armed and armored and fully equipped and trained. And your average run-of-the-mill peasant dwarf, like the 7 we're going to bring here, aren't armed and trained. So, if you're going to embark someplace hostile, you might consider bringing the finished products for weapons, for example, or tools in order to get yourself underground quicker than we're going to do. I'm hopeful, and crossing our fingers here, guys, famous last words, mark me down now. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to kind of protect ourselves from wandering hordes of monkeys and Kias filching all our goods before we can get underground, but that's no guarantee. We have seen giant monkeys attack my dwarves and kill my expedition in the first season before on stream. So it's possible that we could have that here. Ammo is a finished good. I would bring the raw materials. Leather is nice, but we have some draft animals we could butcher if we need leather fairly early. We could make some bolts and hunt for it if we decided to go that route. Cloth is technically an intermediate good. You could take the thread, which is a little cheaper, and use the thread to make cloth, and then the cloth to make whatever you're making, and you'll get it a little cheaper by doing it that way than you will by bringing the cloth. Wood is nice, but we're going to be embarking in an area with plenty of it to start. Stone is nice, but we don't need a whole lot to start, and once we've got picks, we'll be up to our eyeballs in stone in no time. Metal bars are nice, but they are technically an intermediate good. Bring the ore and reproduce them on site. Small cut gems. If you're serious, bring the raw gems. Don't bring the cut ones. Cut them on site. They're cheaper that way. But since they're just decorations or trade goods, I wouldn't bother with them to start. Sand, again, is dirt cheap. Comes with a free bag. I recommend you bring some. Even if you're not going to start up a glass industry, you can always dump the sand out and keep the bags. The bags are actually more valuable than the sand. Glass is an intermediate good. It's made from sand. Clay is a raw material useful for making all sorts of fired goods. If you're serious about building a brick industry, you'll need to embark someplace with clay or give it up. Clay is a little more finite than stone, unfortunately, because you'll have fewer layers of it than you will of stone. You probably won't be able to do everything out of clay if you're thinking big and clay. So your bricks are going to be a little more limited than your raw stone blocks, for example. But clay can be used to make a wide variety of tools and things that your dwarves are going to need inside the fortress, so it's not necessarily a bad thing to have. Sand can do most of what clay, I think most or all of what clay can do, and then some, and is more valuable in most cases. The catch being that some kinds of clay, specifically fire clay here, and only fire clay, don't require glazing, while the others do, and glazing can actually make your stuff more valuable. So if an item can be made from, say, glass, unless you make it from special glass, a clay item that is made from a good clay and glazed could actually come out more valuable by virtue of the additional component value, despite the raw material not necessarily being as valuable. Fire clay deserves a special mention. If you make pots from clay, they are useless until they are glazed and refired. This is actually realistic. Real earthenware stuff is not something you would want to drink out of on a long-term basis. The nooks and crannies harvest bacteria like you would not believe, and you will kill yourself if you are drinking repeatedly from an earthenware vessel once it becomes contaminated. Eventually, those bacteria are going to kill you. So, fire clay, on the other hand, makes porcelain, not just clayware, not just earthenware. And porcelain has the advantage of being impervious to water. Unlike earthenware, its nooks and crannies do not hold bacteria, and it's closer to like an obsidian when it's done than a more porous stone. So if you are going to do a clay industry, and you're serious about being able to use your clay stuff immediately, as well as getting the additional value, fire clay is not only the most valuable type, but is also the only type that does not require glazing before its clay goods are useful. It's worth bringing. We're not going to bring any clay because we have some on site, and we'll have time to glaze it if we decide to go that route. Stone blocks are an intermediate. All of the apparel types are finished goods. Cheeses are a finished good or an intermediate good, depending on how you view it. Powders, gypsum powder is nice for being able to deal with broken bones. Doesn't hurt to bring a little and trade for more later. Temporarily, I'm going to remove the anvil, famous last words, so that we can see all the categories still. Let's see, where were we? We were at powders and extracts, weren't we? Okay, so extracts are intermediate goods that you harvest, like milk, for example. We'll have animals we can harvest for milk if we are so inclined. Crafts are finished goods, finished goods, finished goods, finished goods, and so on and so forth and so such. We can make all these things on site. Thread is a basic good, but can be a little expensive. Pigtails we'll be able to harvest. Giant cave spider silk really doesn't offer anything other than additional value over its small companion, so bring the small stuff because it's cheap. If you're serious about having all your guys equipped in giant spider silk outfits later, you'll have to worry about harvesting yourself a giant spider. If we get lucky, maybe we will. I've not managed to do it yet, but it's out there somewhere, just waiting to happen. So, yarn is harvested from your animals, and we have sheep, so we will have yarn. Sheets are basically unused writing materials, and we will produce those ourselves. We won't need them to start, and they're not essential. Ropes are finished goods. Splints, likewise, and are made from wood, and stuff that can be made from wood is easy to get the wood. Crutches, likewise. Lye is used for all kinds of stuff, but we can make it from wood, and we have plenty of it. Charcoal's made from wood, potash from wood and lye, pearl ash, wood and lye, and some other stuff. The gist of it is everything else that is on this list is something that either we can make on site, or that we have the materials to make, or that we can have the materials to harvest on site right now. Now, and we're not going to need those things immediately. If I'm not bringing it, we probably didn't need it. And some of the stuff that I'm bringing, we probably won't need right away. Like the gypsum powder, hopefully we won't need that. We could. Maybe we'll end up with a broken bone fairly early and need to not just splint it, but cast it, in which case, our doctor's going to need some gypsum powder and a source of water and all that good stuff. But for right now, this gets us a list of stuff. And we're a point under budget, so now we can go back up here and add a point of sand. Yay. Or an additional seed of dimple cup spawn if we wanted to. But frankly, I'd rather have the bag. So, I mean, that's it. That's the beginnings. Okay, so now I'm not saving this just yet because I want to give us a chance to discuss name. So we're 3 hours into the broadcast, guys. 3 hours, and we haven't come to the point now where we are ready to name our fort, name our group, embark, and start playing. I'm going to save the embark profile. So let's save this as actually, let's name this a little different in case somebody else is doing it and they want to use this later. And I can export that profile out to Pastebin along with the World Gen settings. So those of you who might like to have them ahead of the broadcast tomorrow can have them ahead of that. So let's name our fort. Now, as is customary, those of you who show up for the pre-embark get to talk about the name of the fort. Those of you who didn't show up, you just get to live with whatever they pick. So let's get some names. And this is a first come, first pick kind of thing. Start shouting out names, and I'll start hitting random. If you see one you like, you shout it out. First one I think that I see in chat that I like, that's what we'll end up with. First come, first serve. This is first cat catches the dwarf. Ready? Here we go. Chat's asleep on their feet. Check that out. One? I'm only going to get one of you? That's it? You're killing me here, guys. You're killing me. All those people in the audience and only one of you is going to offer a suggestion? I'm shocked. That's got to be a first. All right. That's what we're going to go with. Ah. Well, rest assured, guys. All that time you took to speak up, all we get is the awful idea. Awful idea is what wins. That's the way this works. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go with that. Let's see. Let's do our group, and I get to do the group. Oh, I gotta reserve some privileges for myself. And I'll save that. All right. Hey, we can all have nice things. This whole broadcast is about getting some nice things to kids, like, medicine that they need, which is kind of the point. Maybe learning a little Dwarf Fortress on the side. So that's it. I mean, here we are, 3 hours later, and we've got we've got an Embark profile. We've got a World Gen seed. We've got XML files that contain our Legends settings. We've got it all ready to go for tomorrow morning. 3 hours flat. Ding, right there. Including our technical problems early on when we started. Okay. I had my anvil back? I did. Okay, good. Anvil essential. So where does that leave us? We're ready to embark. And we technically do the embark tonight because I've saved my profile, so now we're good there. Gave my dwarves all. Gotta make sure I gave everybody discipline because that's an important thing to do. Yep, everybody's got discipline. Good, good. Okay, let's do the embark here. Oh wait, symbol. Ha, I forgot. New version, symbol. So yeah, we get to select an element. A symbol that defines our dwarves. So, for example, we could do an object, and we could do a we could do a filter, spear, a spear, and we could do 3 for a plural of spears. So the Die of Thundering is an image of 3 spears with a tree, and we're going to make it a feather tree because why not? Two feather trees. So I could do feather trees being flayed by axes, for example, for those of you who, hate your elves, for example. Let's go back into symbol and we'll get back to the start there. Okay, so we like the, let's see. Sphere is not really a thing here, unfortunately. Balls, but only spiked balls. Okay, we could do spiked balls, I guess.
Spiked balls in a sphere.
One spiked ball.
2 spiked balls in a sphere.
Let's see. Can a spiked ball strike a triumphant pose? There's your question, guys. Can a spiked ball strike a triumphant pose? A spiked ball is falling. Maybe. Maybe. So it really is just objects then. Okay. Although the name doesn't tell you, that's actually 2 different dwarves. A dwarf and a dwarf. Okay, let's get rid of the 2 dwarves, and we'll put back in 2 dwarves. And all right, you asked for it. Unfortunately, we don't get to name it, so it's still going to be the Die of Thundering. Unfortunately, that's our symbol name here. Don't think. Oh yes, we do get to change the name. Okay, so what do we want to? So what do we want to call our? Kirambaban Om. How about that? Okay, chat. What do you think?
You should name a dwarf. I want to choose a dwarf name.
Okay.
The dwarf has no name.
Hey, that's how this works. It's very simple. If we're going to do a bad idea, you go all the way. Half-heartedly doing a bad idea is a half-ass bad idea. That's even worse. Put the full ass out there. Get it all out there. So if we're going to be the balls of steel, that's fine. We're going to have the holy ball of crushing as our symbol. What do you think? Good? Better suggestions? I'm all ears. Willing to search through the lists for a while if there's something somebody can come up with that sounds like a good creative idea. It's for the symbol. Okay, let's go with it. So let's save that again. I'm not sure if the symbol gets saved, the fort name and group name get saved with the profile now or not. So I want to make sure I get those updates saved. There we go. Now let's embark. Once we've done everything. And then I'll save the game there.
The embarkment zone.
That'll be ready for tomorrow. Now it's worth noting a couple of things here. This indicator right here, this thing here will actually tell you a few things about what you should be paying attention to. Particularly, you'll actually know about one type of animal that you should probably be wary of in your site. This site has giant dingoes. Now, whether the giant dingoes are actually a threat or not will depend on all sorts of other stuff, but you can be sure that there is at least the possibility that we'll see giant dingoes. Your dwarf, your average unarmored, unarmed, untrained dwarf is not a match for a giant anything, not even a giant wallaby. So, frankly, giant anything should, cause some manner of trepidation. If this were evil terrain, we would also have to worry about undead versions of all those animals, which are not only freakishly strong, but also much harder to kill and generally much more lethal, as well as being able to do things like walk through your wells without drowning, destroy some of your wooden structures and furniture, all kinds of other stuff. Fortunately, all we have to deal with is giant animals and animal people, and probably a whole lot of thieving animals when we embark, but we'll deal with that tomorrow. At that point, we punch our key and we're brought out here, and we're at our wagon. I think I need to check, but I think that this is not the graphics tile set that it should be, so we're going to have to update our tile set too. I can show you guys how to do that tonight. So that's actually where we want to leave it, so I'm going to save the game here. This gives me an initial save, but I'm also going to save my game, my progress, my auto-save, if you will. Ah, there we go. It did load the tile set. I was starting to get worried there. There we go. That's the tile set I remember. Much better. Alright. So it's got our initial save. We'll save our game and quit here. so that we're ready for tomorrow morning. Now, before I head out, if there are any questions you guys have, I'm all ears. Those of you who stick around are welcome to help me with the troubleshooting I'm now going to have to do to figure out why my audio and push-to-talk settings weren't working previously. See if I can get that working properly, since it was working just fine yesterday. But I don't just want to bail out on you guys. I do want to end with a request for donation, of course. Remember, down below the stream here, you're going to see a link to the Extra Life campaign. We are trying to collect money for, sick children who need medical attention, chronic diseases, injuries, accidents, you name it. It really is for good cause. None of this money actually is collected for me. All of it goes directly to the charity in question. We've done this now for 3 years running, and we've managed to achieve our goal in those years. It would be nice if we could keep that running. I kind of depend on you viewers and my friends and family to kind of get me to that point. We don't set a particularly high goal, since we don't know that many people, but it'd be kind of nice if we could keep our streak going. There's a link to the donation page directly below the stream, as well as information on the Extra Life campaign if anybody might like to participate next year. If you have questions about the Extra Life campaign or how to donate, feel free to ask. If you have questions about the tutorial we've had tonight, tips on creating a vampire fortress? Don't. Vampires eventually begin to slow down. If you're serious about creating a vampire fortress, you don't mind the fact that your dwarves are eventually going to end up slow as molasses running uphill in December because they haven't had a drink in long enough, or I guess maybe if you're okay with just munching on every migrant who comes to visit in order to keep a handful of vampires sated, then what you basically want to do is create a spiked pit that's 1 by 1, drop your vampire. You'll have to have a vampire first to get more. Drop your vampire into it so he is impaled on the spikes, and then fill the pit with water and put a well over the top of it. And anybody who drinks from the well water will then get it vampire blood tainted water, and eventually many of them are going to become vampires. At which point you're going to have all the fun of dealing with people who won't drink alcohol to keep their speed up, who subsist on the blood of migrants, and then are unhappy when all the migrants are getting killed. Good luck. You're going to need it. A vampire or two as dedicated lever pullers is maybe potentially viable. You could wall them in after you make them into vampires by making them into the militia and moving them to a particular region, then walling them in and providing them the necessary materials to either construct their own furniture or the furniture to being provided before you lock them in. At which point you can get a dedicated lever puller, which is kind of useful. But generally speaking, Vampire Fortress or, Seething Pit of Undead or Werewolf defenses, those are the kinds of things that, as a new player, I really wouldn't focus on them. I'd worry, for you new players out there, I'd worry about getting your food stuffs up, making sure you understand how to keep things working, how the work orders function, for example, how to build temples and taverns, and feed your dwarves and defend yourself. Any other questions, guys? Is fishing really good? I don't really lean on fishing as a crutch, but fishing is fantastic to get set up as a supplement to all of your other stuff. It's fairly easy to set up a fishing hut that's impervious to outside attack, at which point, once you've got that fishing hut up and running, it's very easy to provide fish as a supplement to your other foodstuffs. I don't believe that, unless you're on a coast, that fishing can really supplement, take the place of, supplant, I guess I should say, crop production. Plump helmets and pigtails are frankly just, and quarry bushes are just where it's at for the other products they provide, if not the foodstuffs that you're going to need them for as well. But it's not difficult to get a fishing shed up, and we will try to do so fairly early on so we can add fishing to the list of things that our fort produces. I'll want to eventually produce beehives, which we will do on a secluded rooftop area where they are a little more protected from outside invasion, if you will. But mead, like fish, is more of a supplementary thing than a major product. It's not really, honey and mead are kind of things you do once you've taken care of the other stuff, not things you do as a primary goal, generally. Unless the limits have been done, I don't even think it's possible to run a sizable fort off honey alone. The mead you produced wouldn't be enough to keep your dwarves in alcohol. Plots of which size are enough for your initial first 2 waves? My plots are generally way too big for just your first 2 waves. Obviously, it's going to depend on how big your first 2 waves are. If you go straight to cranking out wealth right off the bat, you're going to get a lot larger first 2 waves than I do. My waves will be fairly moderate in size. We won't be very big very quickly because we're going to be more concerned with getting living space excavated early on, getting space engineered. I will probably set up 4 5x5 plots, which is more than I will probably need to sustain my fortress well into the much larger than it is. And by the time we start not having enough food production, that way the plants will start getting reserved almost exclusively for brews production, and we'll start relying on other supplementary sources like fish and meat and eggs. Team Fortress. The only way you're getting 24 hours of learning Team Fortress is if somebody kicks in that $500 donation. No $500 donation, you're getting Dwarf Fortress. But yeah, there's actually, if you go out to the Reddit thread details down there at the bottom, in addition to naming one of my initial 7, I will let people who donate get dwarves named after them. There's a call out on stream if you donate. You can have that done anonymously, of course, if you would prefer. Hey, if somebody wants to chip in the $500 to see me get my butt kicked at Team Fortress for a few hours, I'm good for that. That's a worthy cause. I'm willing to do that. If you all want to chip in and start up a PayPal account that's going to accumulate $500 to give me, so that you can force me to play something else, I'm okay with that. I'm good. You'll get 24 hours of Dwarf Fortress regardless, but for a good donation, I'm willing to give you some extra. Because yeah. But that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, that's pretty much where I wanted to leave off for tonight. Tomorrow we'll pick up with our embark having been done, and we'll carry on the first 24 hours of gameplay in that fortress. Keep in mind, of course, Dwarf Fortress is a long-term kind of thing. 24 hours sounds like a long time, but a fort, that's not as much time as you might expect. We will burn through that 24 hours of tutorial fairly quickly. It won't really be 24 hours of actual gameplay because we're going to have to pause the game and explain things, and I'm going to have to walk you through what I'm doing and why. We will get fairly far along, and my goal is to be able to post the map up to the Dwarf Fortress file depository with some sort of capstone project, probably a tower of some kind, on the surface as a monument that other players can then download and experience either in adventure mode or as reclaiming this fortress. And ideally, we'll get to all of that. We probably, unfortunately, will not touch on particularly deep subjects. Those of you looking for dwarven mechanical and electrical engineering, you're in the wrong place. If you're looking for complicated minecart defenses, this isn't going to be for you. This is going to be a little old school in terms of how we do things. Those of you looking for minecart shotguns and grinders, you're in the wrong place. I may get one, but probably will never get there. We won't have that kind of time. And anything complicated like dwarven adding machines is pretty much right out. We will, however, touch on everything you need to get your fortress up and running, self-sustaining from soup to nuts for a basic fortress that you could theoretically deploy just about anywhere. Any other questions before I head out? I'm going to bounce the stream, and I'll be back in a few minutes to do some technical support kind of work, but I kind of want to keep the questions inside the Dwarf Fortress stream if possible, so that those people who might care about them will actually be able to catch them. Anything else, guys? We will try to get to obsidian farming. I don't know how much we'll do. That's going to depend on how high our magma is. We didn't deploy on a volcano, so we don't have easy obsidian farming available to us. If we happen to get lucky like I did last night and come upon a magma pool midway down to the magma sea, then we'll be able to do some obsidian casting relatively quickly and easily. If I have to build a pump stack to get obsidian farming up and running, we probably won't do it. If I can gravity feed one, we'll be in good shape. Pump stack is just going to be the kind of thing that's a little too problematic for getting done on a stream, basically. It's a lot of work to engineer a pump stack that size. Now, a small one, maybe we could build, a 3 or 4 level pump stack. We might be able to make that work. It'd be late game, but we could theoretically do it. I like to build an obsidian farm in any fortress I have that has ample access to both water and lava. It's an incredibly useful tool to have around. It's really nice to be able to build obsidian fortresses. So maybe we'll try to build an obsidian farm and use that obsidian to, build the black tower on the surface. Any objections? That sounds pretty good. I mentioned the wrong date in the Reddit thread. Oh, did I really? That's terrible. Let's go look. Somebody's on these commented too. Did I really? Where did I do that? Yada yada yada. Today, tomorrow is Friday. That's today. 8 a.m. Eastern Saturday. That's tomorrow. Friday night I'll do the pre-play. Tomorrow... Oh, ha! Yeah. Guess I didn't update this from the old template, did I? Whoops. Well, that wasn't good. Guess you can see how long ago I copied this. Which one I copied this one from, huh? Well, let's see. That would be tomorrow, 11/5/2016. How about we fix that right now? Nice. Thank you for letting me know. I do appreciate it. It would kind of be difficult to attend that 2014 event that, happened 2 years ago. And I thought I caught everything. Damn it. Thank you for catching that. I do appreciate it. Best way to melt drinking water in frozen biomes? Don't embark in frozen biomes. Ha ha ha. Video on demand. Basically, tomorrow I'm going to tune in at 8 a.m. Okay, so let me back up to the question in a second here. Give me a second. I'll talk about the stream first. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. my time, that's 8 a.m. Eastern, I'm going to pick up. And from then, I'm doing 24 hours straight, minus, of course, the time that I'm hitting the toilet or stuffing food in my gullet. You're going to get 24 hours of Dwarf Fortress footage from start to finish. From that fort where we just embarked on, we haven't done anything yet. Nothing but playtime, 24 hours solid. Well, and some tutorializing along the side, of course. You can tune in on Twitch right here tomorrow morning and catch it to start. And I'll be doing it all day and all night. You can catch it after the fact. I'll have it archived out to YouTube so that you'll be able to pick it up after the fact if you miss it for whatever reason. But if you're going to have questions, or if you think you might have questions, you really are better off to be there for the live event. Although I do eventually get around to answering YouTube comments, they're so far down my list of priorities that they might as well not exist. So if you do end up with questions over the eventual archived copy, my suggestion is that you actually pop out to the Reddit thread, the Extra Life Reddit thread, and search for the Nirruden Teaches Dwarf Fortress Extra Life 2016 event thread, and then add it as a comment there. I'm far, far more likely to see it there than I am on YouTube. I basically disabled YouTube sending me spam a long time ago, and typically I don't even bother allowing comments on my videos. It's just, like I said, I only use it as an archive, and I do my streams live. So You can catch it at either of those two places. Failing that, I'm not sure where I could otherwise archive 24 hours plus of video. It's going to be a fairly sizable recording file by the time we're done, many gigs in size. If you have a suggestion or a preference for that and you really want the raw video footage, I'm happy to export it to whoever might considerably want it. Knock yourselves out, guys. But generally, those are going to be the places I would go. Twitch, if you can catch it live, or really quickly after it's live, because Twitch will stop keeping it at some point. And then YouTube after that. Now, tonight I'm going to go out on Pastebin, and if you go out to the Reddit thread that starts all this, that's kind of the central hub for everything, I will post a link to the Pastebin spots with my Embark profile, and actually take that back. I'll just stick those right in the Reddit thread. They're just text. I can do that. That'd be a whole lot easier than tying up Pastebin for it too. So we'll stick those right out in the Reddit thread. I'll put them in a spoiler, or figure out something to bury them in there. Put them in a comment or something in the thread so you guys can find them. That will allow everybody to pull those down if you guys want to generate this world for yourselves. You can create the world on the fly and mess around with it ahead of the broadcast, or start your own Embark where I am and then come back to see how I do things differently. Whatever you have in mind. Play along, play at home, play later, play before. I try to provide as much as I can for you guys to be able to kind of go along with me. Anything else? Oh, let's see. So back up. Let's see. We had a question about drinking water in frozen biomes. The general principle is don't. If you wouldn't want to live there, you probably shouldn't embark there. That's my general philosophy. However, if you're one of those folks who's looking for a more challenging setting and you want to embark on a glacier and you need water, there's a few ways to do it. You can drop a bunch of ice into a trough and seal it up. Once it's indoors, it will melt, and that's water. You can run lava up to the surface directly under the ice, which will melt the surface water and allow you water that way. If you have a frozen river, especially if your glacier embark has a frozen river present, you can thaw the river out and have an infinite supply of drinking water exposed to the surface. The mixing lava and water is incredibly dangerous at the best of times. Not only does it make obsidian, which can kill anything that it touches, not only is lava instantly fatal, not only can the water drown your dwarves, but if you start doing it in a frozen biome, exposed open water can freeze, and frozen water will instantly flash freeze a dwarf right out of existence. So, just like obsidianizing your dwarf, freezing your dwarf is incredibly bad. You just be careful if you're talking about exposed open water in a cold biome. You can do it. I have done it. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Not something we're going to cover in a newbie tutorial. But I did have a glacier embark. However, at the time we didn't have to worry about water quite so much, for one thing, and because we could depend on alcohol as dwarves, and two, I don't think we actually ended up getting attacked by anything that actually caused injuries I would have had to scrub, for example. I think we just kind of lucked out of having to do it on stream. If you're serious about embarking, I think dropping ice into a well and then using that supply is probably your best bet. That's probably the easiest way to go about it. Kickstart, since you've just started Dwarf Fortress, I'd humbly suggest that you go back to the start of the video at 4 o'clock and kind of roll forward through it, at least touching the basic things that we covered. At the very least, it's good to go back through the world gen settings and the Embark profile setup if you haven't before, so that you understand what I did and why I did it along the way. Once I get started, I'm going to be taking everything we did tonight basically for granted. I'm not going to go back and reference it except obliquely, which is part of the reason I do this stuff in advance, because it's not the most exciting thing in the world to watch me, page through these menus, for example, to get all this stuff set up. But it's also because it then comes in its own nice, neat, small, digestible package that you can flip backwards and forwards and find things in. But if you're just starting with Dwarf Fortress, this is actually a pretty good time to start. I started many versions ago. I didn't start until after Dwarf Fortress was 3D, so there are players out there who played the old 2D version when it was first out, and I'm not one of them. Version 31 is where I picked up, and especially around version, although I started earlier, especially around version 31.14 or 31.18, when iron was everywhere, and when he first started changing how minerals were deposited and iron was no longer everywhere, was the first big shock. At that point, I started playing pretty heavily, and I've played Dwarf Fortress from V31 and V34 and V40. I touched V42 only briefly because it had just, if I remember right, it had just come out before our last stream and had problems, basically. At the time, it wasn't really quite stable yet at the time. Version 43 takes some of the things that I've done in version 42 and, of course, expands it even further. And now we have some of the things that we used to depend on in our earlier versions, like wooden training axes, cutting trees, can no longer be depended upon. Yeah, the setup and quick start guide on the wiki are also fantastic. I again, highly recommend that new players go out and tour the wiki. I am only one of many people who tries to communicate how to play this game to people, because it's very easy to bounce off a game like this if you're not familiar with what's going on, if you don't understand what's happening. It's very easy to just not get it, and not getting it is not fun, and not fun is a game you don't play. So those of you who are out there who are interested in God games who might be watching, if my tutorial for whatever reason isn't registering, if I'm covering things at too great a pace, or you feel like you're not yet at the intermediate level, I guess I would say that I'm aiming for, how I make short alcoholic beardy man dig, then the quick start guide on the wiki, and there's other tutorials out there that actually walk you through the basic controls and commands. But I'm far more interested in the hows and the whys, the mechanics of the design and implementation, than I am the rudiments of how to designate spaces and create zones. So when we start playing, I'm going to say, I'm going to create a zone here, I'm going to designate a workshop here or whatever. But I'm not going to necessarily go through each and every keystroke to get to where that was in the menu. I'm going to kind of expect that the player can either open the hotkey reference, or will pay attention to the hotkey reference, or can go back at their own pace and find those things in the reference, since there is one. I wouldn't teach I guess what I'm getting at there is I wouldn't be teaching, if this was a first-person shooter, I wouldn't be teaching people how to strafe. The fact that you can strafe is something that I would expect the player to understand from having gone through the keys menu, basically. Okay. So now, having covered everything, having answered questions and rambled a little bit past where I had originally planned to be, I'm going to bounce the stream, and I'll be gone for a few minutes while I take care of some stuff, and I'll come back and try to get some technical issues worked out with my laptop in one hand and my stream in the other, hopefully. And we'll hopefully get the push-to-talk issue worked out, because I'd kind of like to be able to do this tomorrow without annoying my wife incessantly with, keeping her from saying anything in the background. That's really not fair, and I don't really know why push-to-talk is all of a sudden just bailed out on me here, because it worked fine last night. Believe it or not, I don't like moats. I like my moats dry. No water, no lava. Lava's dangerous in its own right, but it's not necessarily bad. Lava's a good second choice. Getting lava at the surface, if you don't have a volcano, is kind of annoying. It's a lot of work to get lava up there, usually. But if you're going to have a moat, a dry moat is better than a water moat, because just about everything can swim, and some things can't climb, and a deep, climbable moat still means some things would fall back into the hole and take injury or not get out of the hole. So the dry moat will work better than the wet moat, and a lava moat works better than both. I can't promise a lava moat. That's pump stack material if you don't embark on a volcano, and we're not on a volcano. We will, however, at some point, build a beautiful tower, and if I can do it, I'm going to do a tower out of obsidian and gold, I think. Platinum if we have it on site. I believe we have platinum, so we'll do gold and platinum, features on a on an obsidian tower, because I think it'd be a nice capstone to show off in Stone Sense or Armok Vision for those of you who want to go do it later. And it'll allow us to show off obsidian farming, which is intermediate to advanced level kind of stuff. That's good. And it's the kind of thing where once you've got the basics early in the uh-oh, somebody donated. I heard it. Somebody donated. My widget doesn't seem to be working though. If you have no lava, the real method at that point is you have to bring it up from the deep, which means you have to build a pump stack, which is a lot of work. And in addition to that, pump stacks bring their own problems. In addition to being complex pieces of machinery, because of the number of pumps involved and the amount of time and construction it's going to take, you also have to deal with the issue of moving a lot of magma can cause all sorts of temperature recalculations, which really can truncate your frame rate badly. You can actually run into an issue where you'll be able to pump the magma, but it will kill your frame rate to do it. Unfortunately, I apologize, guys. I don't have a whole lot of control over the sound. I don't think. I'll go out and look at the overlay, but I don't think I have a whole lot of control over it. Now, that being a $25 donation, somebody is eligible for one of our starting 7 here. So let's go out here and see if they specified a preference in terms of what they wanted. Alright, we do. So hang on. Let's pick our world back up for a second here. And remember, it's world region 2 here. So since we got a donation, I gotta name this dwarf before I forget, because I don't want to miss out on doing that while I remember it. And then I'll check the overlay to make sure that's not something I can control. I'm not sure how much control I have over the actual volume of that. So let's go back in here and name a craftsman. No other requirements? Nope. Okay. Name that dwarf real quick before I forget. And now that's done and taken care of. Okay. Yeah, it will. It'll update live, and it will, not only will it update live, but it will notify everybody. And like I said, I'm going to go check and see if I can turn that down. I don't know that I have a lot of control over that, actually. Not sure the service I'm using for that actually will work in that way. But I can't do it while I'm live, unfortunately. So, because that's starting to get into the stuff I don't necessarily want you all at home to be able to see. No offense intended. Alright, so 45 minutes after 45 minutes of questions, that ain't bad. Questions and discussion, that's pretty good. So, if you have no lava, then my suggestion is dry with traps, if you're really going to do it. If you have glass, especially, if you have sand and therefore can make lots of glass and magma magma forges making glass can crank out huge numbers of glass trap parts. And while glass is not particularly good against armor, a lot of goblins will come in with one or more pieces unarmored, or pieces that have light armor like leather, and glass can get through those sorts of things. So glass blades, for example, can chew up lightly armored goblin invasions en masse, even though lots of glass blades bounce off steel plate or armor plate or whatever. there's going to be enough unarmored pieces that limbs are going to go everywhere regardless. Alright, so I'm going to bounce the stream here, guys. Apologies in advance for the Hall of Mirrors.